Calling the school committee meeting for September 30th, 2021 to order. Oh, got some nice volume today. So just walk through the agenda. We can turn that down, that'd be great. We can get into a reverb if we don't. We will start with public comment. Al, if you want to have a comment. We'll move to consent agenda. Then we'll have reports. And then I'm going to ask that we take one thing out of order from the agenda perspective, and that's to move the strategy and vision action steps before the superintendent goals introduction.
Okay.
We will then commence the rest of the meeting per the order. So superintendent goals will go next. We'll review and discuss the next steps on policy EBCFA, including some of the data provided both by the district and from the state. We'll declare the surplus equipment. We'll then approve the collective bargaining agreement with the cafeteria employees. We have the FY21 end of year financial summary, including some final transfers. Discuss and vote on the Reading and Writing Advisory Committee. If necessary, appoint school committee members to that advisory committee. And then we will close with reviewing and approving the amendments for policy JRA and KDB, which the subcommittee has completed their review on. So that is our order. Welcome, Curtis. Good, yourself? So we'll start with first, public comment. Does anybody have any public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. And do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
And a second?
Second.
Seconded by Carla. Mr. Robinson could not make it, so we have 5 of us, which does meet the quorum rules. Are there any discussions or topics or questions on the consent agenda?
Nope.
Nope?
No.
Okay, so all in favor by hand vote? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. Okay, and we'll move on to reports. And I realized that last week we need to change this agenda to have 2 assistant superintendents. It's been too long. Dr. Stice, apologies, we'll get that fixed.
Not a problem.
And so actually, Dr. Milichewski, do you want to start and talk about students and then we'll work our way down the list, or?
Sure, that sounds great. Well, good evening, everyone. So our first report normally from our students. So I'd like to give an announcement that in our next school committee meeting on October 14th, we will welcome our student representative who is a senior here at RMHS. Her name is Smrtha. We're very excited to announce that she'll be joining the committee as a student representative. So we'll officially welcome her when she joins us on October 14th. Just a few things from my end, a few updates. First, would like to thank the entire community for their involvement in open houses over the past few weeks. We've now had open houses at all of our levels across the district. We had great turnout in person. From what I've heard from families, they really appreciated being back in the building. For some families, it had been about 2 years since they'd been back in the buildings, and really appreciated the opportunity to connect with staff and with other families. And also just a huge thank you to all of our educators who put together what families had felt a really meaningful evening of learning and collaboration. So thank you to all of our families for their engagement, and also thank you to all of our staff for putting together the event. Second thing I'd just like to update is tomorrow we'll be kicking off our central office visits to day-long visits to schools. So to give a little context, as I've shared a few times, our central office team, as you probably learned by now, is out and about in schools consistently. And something as part of my own entry process and for the process of Dr. Hardy, we felt it was important that we spend a full day in each school in and across the district for us to deeply understand the instructional practices of the community, the operational practices, as well as the school culture. So our first full day visit is tomorrow, and we'll be kicking that off at Coolidge. Very excited to be a middle schooler for the day tomorrow. So it'll be myself, Dr. Hardy, and then Dr. Stiles will be joining us for parts of the day. She has a little bit of an understanding of the community, so will not be there for the full day, but will be with us for parts of the day. And our goal, again, is to deeply understand the community and then for us to calibrate on what we see. To give a little bit of context on how the visits will work, the first part of the day will be a family and caregiver coffee for the first 45 minutes of the day. With the Coolidge families, I've sent out a survey in advance asking a few entry questions, similar to the ones that I've asked other stakeholder groups. I'll be presenting what I've learned from the feedback from Coolidge families tomorrow during that coffee hour, and then open it up to open conversation after I share out some of the trends and feedback. I'll then spend the day, myself and Dr. Hardy, following a schedule created by Principal Marchant, which includes some observations of classrooms, spending time with students, observations of teacher planning throughout the day, and then at the close of the day, we'll be spending with the staff for an optional staff meeting. Staff has been given the opportunity to complete an entry survey as well. I'll be sharing out what I learned, some of the trends from the Coolidge staff survey to start the conversation, and then open it up just for any other thoughts and conversation. So this is the first of 9 visits, and we're very excited to learn in this way. So thank you in advance to the Coolidge community for your warm welcome. That's everything on my end, except for just to thank you to everyone in the community who's helped kick off the year, the first month of the year, and made it a smooth opening, an exciting opening for our students and staff and families. So thank you.
Dr. Stice, do you have anything?
Yeah, just from a student services perspective, we do have Cpac meetings coming up this month. On October 12th, there will be a general meeting, 7 o'clock here in the RMHS library. And then on October 19th, there's going to be a presentation, a basic special education rights presentation, and that will be a virtual meeting. Also, the Cpac is looking for a new board, so if anyone is interested and would like to volunteer to be part of that, they would love to have anybody support that work. So I just wanted to make sure we knew that. And then I feel like I've spent the past 2 years telling you what an amazing staff we have in Reading and how focused everybody is on students and teaching and learning and building relationships. And today I just really wanted to give a bit of shout out to, one, the central office team who's working so hard, that has been amazing to work with. And some of the little things they're doing, like tonight, Michelle Roach is working at a soccer game to help support the students. And that is just so amazing. And something else I had the privilege of doing this week was, as we're starting to think about our evaluation process and setting goals, Allison Wright and I had the opportunity to meet with the OTs and PTs. I was blown away with how creative and thoughtful they are. Our OTs just sent out a Bitmoji classroom for some of the elementary school students so that there are activities they can do at home all around fall and raking up fake leaves, and it's very cool. And the PTs were so thoughtful and amazing as we were talking about some grant opportunities and how do we really make sure students have access to what they need. They have an amazing idea of creating sensory walks that we could do on yoga mats inside the building. So when students can't get outside, what are some of those ways to practice? And I'm just amazed at how innovative and thoughtful our educators are, and I just really wanted to highlight that. The other thing that I'm really proud of this week is we met with all of our private school and early childhood partners this week, and had a lot of great conversations with Austin Prep around how we can support all students in Reading, whether they go to the public school or Austin Prep. We also met with our early childhood partners, got a lot of great information based on what we were talking about at the last meeting, and really had an excellent conversation about what gaps are we seeing in students already, and probably what are those trends going forward. So we're just super grateful to be working with the whole community.
Great, thank you. Baton, do you have anything?
Yes, I do. I know that all of you and the community have read over the past many months how our Commonwealth and our country is undergoing severe labor shortages and supply chains shrinking and constricting. And I wanted to raise to the school committee's attention this evening and the community's attention that Reading is feeling that impact, that unprecedented impact on our school lunch program. I wanted to describe for you what currently is taking place in our school lunch, what the severity is of the challenges of delivering lunches to our students and what we're doing about it. And then I'll close with some information that we're planning on sharing to parents tomorrow. Right now, we're finding it incredibly difficult to receive food product from vendors. They send us information the night before deliveries are scheduled, letting us know that certain products, many products, are not available. They don't have the drivers to drive delivery vans. They don't have their staff available to help with the delivery to school programs. They also, our school lunch program also is down 30% in staffing. We have 11 positions opened. So between the supply chain constriction and the labor shortage, we are incredibly challenged. What we're doing to address this is Danielle Collins who's our food service director, has come up with very creative and clever strategies to control and address what we're able to. So, for example, she's working with our director of facilities, Joe Huggins, to renovate some of our dry goods storage areas so that she can so that she can find a vendor who might be able to deliver 2 or 3 days of goods so that she'll be able to store those goods. She's working with Mr. Huggins to work on installing a cooling unit outside of one of our school buildings in order to expand our refrigeration storage capacity so that 2 days of milk can be delivered instead of 1, for example. She's also working with our nurses and our principals in order to shorten and expedite the line that students are waiting in to check out their food so that they have more time to take their lunch, sit down, and enjoy their meal. She also is working as her role on the board of directors of a collaborative. She's working for Reading as well as other communities to source as many vendors as possible to bring in more food product. And she's also doing this on her own individually. Michelle Roach and all of us in the central office are doing what we can to be aggressive about finding staff to fill some of these empty roles. And Joe Huggins has been helpful in that regard as well. So we are working as a team to help support our students to receive their school lunch every day. In the communication that we plan on sharing with parents in the community, we'd like to reach out to them and explore ways that they could possibly help. So perhaps there'll be opportunities with certain training for volunteers and others to come in and support us. Overall, again, I want to use the word unprecedented. In all the years that I've been in school districts, all the years that Danielle Collins has been a food service director, neither one of us have seen it, seen these and faced and experienced these challenges. So part of sharing this information with you is also to communicate these issues with the community so that we can work together to do what we can to get through each day and ensure our students are receiving a nutritious, safe, and healthy lunch.
That's a question.
Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
You know, a year ago, as we were returning to school for the previous school year, we were, you know, out there evangelizing, take advantage of the free lunch. It's, you know, it's funded by the federal government. It's beneficial to us, actually, if we have more of these. Do we need to sort of actively reverse that message, including the 5+ Chuck of us who, you know, can sort of spread the message to our networks that, is there a benefit to fewer students going through the lunch line, I guess is what I'm asking. And do we need to sort of consider, you know, some messaging around families who, you know, are able to financially, time-wise, you know, other commitments, et cetera, you know, packing lunches where possible?
So that might be a creative solution for those families who are willing and able and would like to pack a lunch and send it with their child. That would be wonderful. We do want to we do want to work through a way to deliver lunch to every child who wants it, who needs it, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're aiming to do every single day. There are certain points, certain days where it's easier than others, and so my point is just to share with you this particular time. It's quite challenging.
I think to add to that, we're working very hard for students who have food allergies or food sensitivities, but we also want to work with the families to let them know that pizza may be the only gluten-free choice we have, not because that's what we would choose, it's what the vendors have been able to provide us. So the nurses under Mary with Danielle are working very hard to make sure we always have an option for those students, but they may not be a variety of options or the best options. And so please know we're very well aware of it. We're looking at it carefully every single day. But that may be families that are able to say, oh, well, we'll just send in lunch. If they'd like to have an option right now, that may be an option for them to choose that, because we can't guarantee there's going to be a variety.
Carla, go ahead.
So I'm taking it, I think, on the opposite end of where Sean is going. So I know that the whole food safe training piece of it kind of adds a wrench into it.
Yes.
Is that something, is that like a one-day training, or is that a couple of hours? What does that entail, for one? I'm assuming that when you put out your memo, that it's going to say, hey, come and work for us, this is, your hours, and these are the great benefits, or whatever the situation is. But then on the flip side with the volunteers, hey, can you give 2 days at your kid's school? But you'd have to come to this training that we're going to have on these specific days. Is that?
Yes, thank you for raising that. That was a conversation we had today. So we're researching the Serve Safe training program, how many hours, what's involved, and if we actually have a trainer associated with one of our central office leaders. So we will add that to the communication. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Tom?
I want to say something else, too, as we finish reports. I think a couple of times we've shared that we won't have every central office administrator here for every meeting. We're just trying to balance the amount of night commitments, for the team, too. So just being mindful of that moving forward. There might not be certain members of the team here as we move forward. So just want to be explicit about that.
Yeah, understood and agree 100%. Really going back a little bit, Susan, if you don't mind. Last year, I think Danielle put things together like farm to table and stuff like that. Are those programs still in effect, and are they part of the supply problem, or are they helping the supply problem?
I will need to ask Danielle specifically about that. The supply issues are coming from our major food companies, our food vendors. These are national and statewide vendors that just are unable to get product to us because of their own labor shortages as well. So, but I will report back on that particular program.
Okay. And I just want to applaud the creativity of trying to look for volunteer type stuff. We've tried that in the past, and hopefully it'll work this time. So thank you for considering that. I think it ties with a lot of the stuff we've talked about from a leadership team perspective about igniting the volunteer community that Reading has and leveraging it. One other question is, are we considering other prepared food providers? I know, for example, our pizzas are provided by a business in town. Would we consider doing an RFP for other prepared foods from other providers in town that may have other supply abilities to cover some of these needs as well?
I can tell you that Danielle Collins is exploring every option. So, yes.
She's awesome. I agree. And
Thank you.
All of what you outlined is typical Danielle, trying to solve the problem in any way possible. So.
And if I can, just take one more moment to say how fortunate Reading Public Schools is to have Danielle Collins as their food service director. She's phenomenally committed, enthusiastic, a problem solver, a go-getter. She's the director to have, particularly in a situation like this.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. All right, we'll move on to liaison/subcommittee reports, and we'll start with Carla.
Great, thank you. I had 2 meetings on the same night, and Sarah went to Permanent Building Committee. I went to the Bylaw Committee, which Sean happened to be there because it was a combination of the Bylaw Rules Committee. This was on the 27th. The Rules Committee was entertaining the instructional motion that was presented at town meeting, which requested the use of electronic voting at town meeting. The Rules Committee instructed the Bylaw Committee to do 2 things: to look into electronic voting and to explore recording of all votes. These votes would be subject, because now the votes would provide a record, they would become public records requestable, if that's a word. The town already has 200 of the clickers, so the committee asked Laura Gem to look into how much it would cost to update the software and to look into that technology. And the bylaw committee is going to research what other towns are doing, the legal implications of potential charter changes, and then they'll make recommendations to town meeting. And obviously, town meeting votes to approve that and to approve any money or associated costs with it.
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Sean?
Thanks, Tom. No liaison reports, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the passing earlier today of Jamie Mon, the longtime resident of Reading. I only came to know Jamie during the last few years through town government circles, but his passing has hit me and many who knew him pretty hard. Jamie and his wife Emily moved to Reading about 35 years ago and have been absolute pillars in our community during that time. Jamie was for several years a member of the Conservation Committee and also a longtime town meeting member. He was actively involved in the UU Church, serving over the years in capacities ranging from leading the church's efforts to support the Bread and Roses Soup Kitchen in Lawrence to a stint as president of the church's governing board. His career and much of his passion was dedicated to the preservation of our oceans and our environment at large. With a PhD in biological oceanography, one of Jamie's crowning career accomplishments was playing a significant role in the cleanup of Boston Harbor in the 80s, when he helped develop the environmental impact statement that helped finally stop the daily flow of hundreds of millions of gallons of untreated sewage into the harbor. Jamie was an educator, teaching at both UMass Lowell and Tufts, and such was the caliber of his expertise that the federal government would call on him as a subject matter expert. He was also a longtime supporter of the METCO program, and in a profile in the Chronicle a few years ago, highlighted that students living in Reading are gaining as much or more as our students living in Boston from that program. For those that knew him either in person or through hearing him often have much to say at town meeting, one of his most endearing characteristics was a unique regional accent that you could never quite pin down. Turns out it's a Virginia accent. On a personal level, the first thought that came to mind when I heard of his passing was simply that he was the sweetest guy. An incredibly kind soul, a big heart. There's not enough you can say about him as a person. Our town is a little darker today. I'll miss Jamie, and my thoughts and the thoughts of so many are with Emily and their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I've gone past him in Conservation Commission a few times, and he was always well thought out, well organized, and obviously I've seen him in town meeting as well, so I agree he will be missed. Sarah, do you have a liaison report?
I do. I have 2. So the RCTV board met on September 21st. It was a really great and fun group of people. I'm not just saying that because they're here recording tonight, but they're a really fun board. So they gave us some updates on how the summer programming went with all the COVID restrictions. It sounds like it was really successful. The fall classes for kids ages 7 to 15 are posted on the website, and they start in October. So there's some good opportunities on there from photography and film and all kinds of different things. RCTV will continue to provide live streaming of some events moving forward, which is great while we're still living in the COVID times, including home games for varsity football and I think soccer. And they're looking at other ways that they can be involved and live stream other things as well. The next meeting for that is on October 26th. It's both a board and annual meeting. And then, as Carla mentioned, the Permanent Building Committee met on September 27th, which I think was earlier this week. Lost track of time. We completed the last of the 3 building walkthroughs for the municipal building report. So we got the opportunity to tour the Matera cabin, the cemetery garage, which was really fun. There's a big digger in it, and the stadium snack shack. So the committee is actually going to be meeting again on Monday, the 4th of October, to review the municipal building report and narratives, along with the checklists. So that does include, I believe, the school buildings as well, which they had toured previously.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry about that. Didn't realize it was opening over there. Erin, do you have a subcommittee and liaison report?
I do. Jen already gave the information on Cpac, so I think that was covered. The policy subcommittee has been busy. We've met 3 times so far. We reviewed policies JRA and KDB, student records and public's right to know, which the committee will be discussing tonight. We've also had 2 meetings on policy JICH, which is alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, and drug use by students prohibited, as well as the accompanying procedures for that policy. We've finished our piece of going through and making recommended edits, but given the content of that particular policy, we wanted to reach out to Erica McNamara and get her feedback and insight. Then
Regards to potential purchasing of land around Meadowbrook that would potentially cost the town $2.25 million, with all sorts of other different ideas they have around that as well. So that is in play there. It will also be as a warrant article in the October meeting for the October special town meeting that's coming up on October 18th. That's the Meadowbrook related side of the conversation. So from a financial perspective, that's interesting. And the other thing, the committee's aware, because we just found out today, but to make the public aware, we have been added to the senior study level from an MSBA perspective for the Killam project. That will commence with some meetings the week of October 18th. First, a virtual meeting with the town manager, the director of facilities, Dr. Milczewski, quite a few other people. Between 9 and 12, it's a virtual meeting. And then there will be a on-site visit to Killam on the 20th of October by the members of the study team. It does not mean we've been selected yet. This is kind of the next step. As you've seen in the packets in the past couple sessions, we have had support from our delegation between the Senate, State Senate, and state representatives for this project as well. So this is just kind of the next step in the process. We also, depending upon how that goes, we have tentative things on our agenda for later this year. Public hearing related stuff and whatnot to discuss that project and figure out next steps and whatnot. But I just want the community to be aware that we have moved to that next step, for lack of a better way to say it. Okay. All right, anything else on liaisons or committee reports? All right, so Sean, do I have a motion to take things out of order?
You do. I move to take item D1 on the agenda, strategy and vision action steps, out of order.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Aaron. Any discussion?
It was Sarah.
Or, was it Sarah?
The masks, it's hard, I get it.
Seconded by Sarah. I thought Aaron was throwing her
Also, I'll
voice over
answer
here.
to that because that's my sister's name, so it doesn't matter.
Was there any discussion on that? Okay, seeing none, hand vote in favor? All opposed? And that passes 5-0. So, Dr. Milczewski, I think we're on to you. You want to switch?
Did you want to plug in?
No? Yep, here, go. You can,
Either way, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
I think it's labeled down over here, so.
Okay,
I might
that's
have to, unfortunately, control it.
Right here.
There we go. And, of course, I will review. I had it the right way. I had it the right way before, right?
Just click it again. There you go.
All right. Good. You got it?
We're good.
Okay.
All right, so at our September 13th school committee meeting, we talked a little bit about our priorities for the upcoming school year. I'd like to emphasize this is not the year where we are revamping our district strategic plan. I think as we spoke about, we've taken the district strategic plan, sat down with a variety of stakeholders to say, what are the things that we should really prioritize this year to move our district forward? So we're going to speak a little bit tonight about, last time we talked a little bit a higher level of our strategy. Now we're going to drill down a level further and talk about some of the specific action steps for our team this year. Before I do that, you'll hear us talk about all students. We did last school committee meeting on the 13th share a statement that was developed collaboratively across a few different stakeholder groups, including, as you see here, the Reading School Committee, the central office, directors, principals, and the leadership of the RTA. At our joint school committee retreat, we developed the statement and this commitment to equity, which reads, the Reading School Committee, central office, directors, principals, and leadership of the Teachers Association celebrate the diversity of the Reading community and beyond by embracing differences to empower every student, staff member, and family of the Reading Public Schools. We embrace all members of the community, no matter where we live, what we look like, what we believe, what language we speak, who we love, or how we learn, consistent with the human dignity of all. When we are unwavering in our commitment to equity, we support every student and staff member in maximizing individual potential. This requires us to identify, analyze, and confront gaps in opportunities and outcomes for all students. So as we share this shared commitment from all different leaders across our community, we hope that you see that reflected not only in the action steps we outlined tonight, but just in our actions of leadership day to day. This is what we shared during the meeting on the 13th. We outlined sort of the vision that has existed in the Reading Public Schools, try to outline our clear goal of having success for every single student, academically, social, emotionally, and personally, and then drill down a little bit about some of the four major strategies that we're going to focus on this year to move us closer to that goal and to that vision. So tonight, we're going to take a little bit of time to walk through what, if you can see the screen, some of those action steps within each of the four strategy areas. You'll see some of these are a little bit more fleshed out than others, right? Some of these we realize we've identified as a need or an area that we need to focus on. We haven't quite mapped out exactly what that work's going to look like yet. And you'll see some of these others, we are just still this year in a phase of identifying and assessing. So not all of these are necessarily, verbs like transform or update or react to. Some of them are more identifying and assessing, and we'll get into that nuance as we move forward. So I'm going to start with strategy one. I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to talk us through a little bit about our strategy for developing, communicating common operational systems.
So our first strategy is going to focus on systems that are focused on safety and infrastructure. The way that we're going about doing this is we're listening. Dr. Stiles, Dr. Hardy, and I are meeting weekly with each school by level, elementary, middle, and high, to their instructional leaders, the principals and assistant principals. We're meeting with them to hear from them, to listen to them about what are some of the obstacles that are preventing them from gaining efficiencies in their school. By gaining efficiencies, we hope that that will lead to them saving time, saving effort, so that they can focus their attention on teaching and learning. The meeting objectives are to work collaboratively with each other to identify and prioritize and remove obstacles, to develop the streamlined and efficient systems. Our meeting outcomes are focused on these 14 areas. These areas have been identified by principals. There have been other areas where we'll also be focusing on safety and infrastructure. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about Tier 1, Strategy 1.
Do we want to have questions about each strategy, or do we want to hold them for the end?
That's your call. We can do it either way.
I guess if there's something pressing as we're walking through, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can handle them all sort of at the end.
That's fine.
Dr. Stiles is going to walk us through strategy 2.
So strategy 2 is about the acceleration roadmap, and just like the guidance that the state put out around the dyslexia guidelines, the state has put out something called this acceleration roadmap. We are really thrilled to see this. We feel like it's a very well put together document, just like the dyslexia guidelines. And really what it is, it's a tool for teachers and leaders to really support the acceleration of student learning this school year. And they know that all students have been impacted due to the pandemic, And it's really exacerbated many of the existing inequities and opportunity gaps. And so the state designed this roadmap to provide a focused approach to supporting all students as they come to school. And they really made two different roadmaps, one for administration and leaders and one for teachers. And the roadmap has three focus areas. One priority is to develop a sense of belonging. The second priority is to monitor student understanding. And the third priority is to ensure grade-appropriate instruction. And when we looked at this as a leadership team, we said, perfect, because this is exactly what we want to work on. And if this is a tool that can help drive the work we already want to do, let's figure out how we can use it. And there's a few things that come with this acceleration roadmap that people can find right on the state website. They do a self-assessment, which is a really powerful tool, because when you look at it, it's really asking you to consider your context and plan strategically. And what it's going to allow us to do as a district is each school is going to look at this and say, in my school, I'm supporting students to attend, and they're able to rate that. So we're all going to work to the overall sense of belonging, but different schools may be targeting different areas within that depending on their school needs, and we'll be able to work together. They also provide a timeline, which is great, using like phase one being the diagnostic and the planning and the launch of the work, and then the monitoring and the follow-up throughout the year. And they've given you dates and kind of what are your steps and your goals. So it's really a way to support this work and not lose sight of it as the year goes on. And one of the things that I really liked about it, when I went on and I looked, and I was very, very excited about this, they've also done building leader professional development sessions, and they've recorded them. So anyone can go on and watch them. And the title of the very first session is All Means All. And right then and there I went, we are on the right track. We came up with that separate from the state. We are really doing this work. And that first session is about explaining how the learning acceleration approach supports students with diverse learning needs. And then how do you equitably accelerate their learning that is proactively meeting their needs when they're starting significantly behind everyone else. And that the state's really focusing on, this is not about remediation, this is about acceleration. And how are we going to work through it together? So for us as a leadership team, the building leaders have already started talking about it and how they are using it as well. This is a great anchor for us and something that the state has researched and is putting out supports that we're going to be able to use to continue the work that's happening in the buildings.
In addition to strategy one of shoring up our operational systems, two, really grounding us and identifying the best practices in the acceleration roadmap, strategy three relates to us trying to figure out and market who we are as a district, and we should see that in a couple of different ways. First, we really appreciate and applaud the work of the team of the Portrait of a Graduate, who I think did a great job of identifying what do we want from our Reading students when they leave our district. Now I think our challenge is to try to figure out how do we also then backwards map that all the way down to figure out what that looks like in all of the work of our district. So we want to make sure that isn't become something that just lives on a shelf, but something that actually defines who we are as a district. So some more work to do on exactly what that will look like, but a focus for us. And then the other piece is we feel we need to, as a district, show who we are and what we believe in all of our communication, in all of our social media, through our website and through our job posting. And I think if you know where we are, we have some work to do in each of those areas around job postings, website, social media, and communication, and we want that to reflect who we are and what we believe in. So again, another action step for us this year. And then lastly, strategy four, Michelle Roach is not with us tonight, but this has been her major focus areas around developing a plan to improve systems and practices in HR in three areas. First, retention, figuring out what are the barriers currently and holding us back in retaining staff, and then also what are the opportunities to increase staff retention. In terms of development, 3 areas of focus for us this year. One, prioritizing the development of our principals, and I'll share sort of why that's a rationale coming up soon in the superintendent goals. Number 2, figure out what can effective PD structures look like within our new current RTA contract. 3, we realize there's a lot of roles in our district that we can do a better job of defining what are their roles and responsibilities and defining how do we support and grow them. So for example, looking at the role of a para. How do we make sure that paras have access to high quality professional development opportunities that they feel will push their practice forward? So taking an analysis of sort of all those other roles and how we can support them. And then last but not least, in recruitment, so how do we, again, assess sort of some of the barriers in place for us to in attracting high quality candidates, and then also streamline some processes that, help us to be more efficient, and also what are some of the ways that in our job postings, in our marketing, in our recruiting, we can attract high quality candidates, and by high quality I mean the people we want in front of our students and also people who reflect the diversity of our students. So I'll pause on this again, just as a summary. Strategy 1, we need to shore up operational systems to make sure we're as efficient as possible. 2, we need to ground ourselves in the shared best practices in terms of moving students forward, accelerating students this year. Strategy 3, we need to market who we are and make sure that's lived out in everything that we put out from the district. And 4, we need to make sure that we shore up our systems of HR to make sure we can attract, keep, and develop the best possible talent in front of our students. So we'll pause there and happy to answer any questions or dive deeper into any of those.
Any questions from the committee? Sean?
I have one. On strategy 1, these strike me as a mix of areas where, we're not doing it poorly or particularly well anywhere, but we're just sort of inconsistent. Some where, probably some schools handle things really well and other schools struggle with it to some degree. And some where we just probably haven't put any focus on it, in the recent past. In that second bucket in particular, in the early discussions around defining these, did you get the sense that there was sort of good, I'll call it self-awareness at the building level of where, there's something that they're kind of struggling with that they feel other buildings do well?
Yes, I think that, and maybe Dr. Stives can comment too, but I think that our weekly operational huddles have been extremely helpful in meeting with the principals. They've shared what some of the obstacles are. There are some schools that are doing things a little bit differently. They're comparing and contrasting, and together we're refining and improving our systems.
And to add to that, I think that they are very reflective and understand that there are areas where we want them to shine and be diverse and have their own school feel and mission and vision. And there are areas where we need consistency. And these are some of those areas. So we're doing a lot of work on initial data collection. Where are we at? What do we have in our buildings? And then how do we build processes that are consistent? And some of these things that we've been working on are going to actually end up probably back at the policy committee, looking at some maybe recommended changes as we're working through what makes the most sense and how are we doing some of these things. So I have to say, I know that it's a super thoughtful, engaging conversation at each level and then vertically because we're making those connections, and I really think it's moving the district forward in some of those systems.
That's great. Thank you. Sean, I have one follow-up too. I think on the strategy too, we were very selective with the words develop a shared understanding and then identify shared practice. We recognize we're a new team, so even when we started talking about continuously monitoring student understanding, there's different practices that we feel are important and effective, and I think having this acceleration roadmap helps ground us in a framework to have those conversations. And to your point about like the awareness of schools of where they are, I think we realize that we have some work to do with calibration on what are the best practices in continuously monitoring student understanding, because there are different ideas of what that looks like and what best practice is. So I think there needs to be that, again, shared understanding amongst us and then shared amongst principals. And I think that's our goal this year, not to effectively implement every sort of piece of the acceleration roadmap, but to ground ourselves in what we feel are those best practices.
Sarah?
That was actually going to be my question around strategy 2. Can you speak a little bit more about what continuously monitoring student understanding means, what that's starting to look like, the ideas and strategies you guys are looking at?
Yep. So I'll start, and then Dr. Stice, feel free to jump in. So actually at our DLT on Tuesday, in addition to spending half the time diving into our sort of district level MCAS data, the second half is for us as a district diving into what these practices sort of mean. So we haven't spent a ton of time calibrating on this yet, but principals are sort of reading and internalizing and reflecting on this, and then Tuesday, we're kind of all looking together and highlighting some best practices. So I don't want to move too far forward until we have that chance to calibrate.
I think some of the other conversations we're having around that is really around some of our assessments that we're doing this year. How are we analyzing the data? And then how are we disaggregating it? What instructional practices are we going to put in place? And then how do we progress monitor and move forward? And then also, how does that impact the student service support team process? And how are we collecting and monitoring that data? And one of the things that we've also talked about is like the impact on the teacher instructional cycle. What do they need to know to be able to do this whole group and then in their classrooms? And how do we support them, because they're amazing at delivering instruction, and how do we make sure they have the right data to deliver that instruction? The other thing that we did today that was really exciting, when all of the team chairs met with all the principals, we talked about, as we're evaluating special education teachers and staff, what are our look-fors, and let's communicate that. And part of that is data collection. How are we noticing people are collecting data? How is that in driving their instructional practices? And then what's the impact on a team meeting? And so you're going to see this played out at a variety of levels across the district. And again, us really calibrating our practice around how we're doing this. Thank you.
Just real quick, I wanted to hit on what Sean hit on there, and the answer exactly went where I thought it was going to go, which is that there's some feedback that's going to come back to the policy committee as well. There's most of those, not all of them, but most of them are related to policies that we may need to refresh, which is why we have that subcommittee, right? So that's great. Thank you for that. And the monitoring of data and the consistency. Sarah hit my question, but the answer is exactly what I was expecting to hear as well. And as we do that, and as we can be consistent and then use it to inform the instruction appropriately, whether it's for reading, math, science, whatever, we'll all collectively get better and learn throughout that process, right? And as a result, our students will learn more. So I'm encouraged by where we're going here. You know me as well, I like the word acceleration. I feel like we have a lot of things to catch up on, and the fact that roadmap even acknowledges it from a state perspective is great to see as well. And I like all means all. I saw that video too, Dr. Stice. The first one is all means all, so I appreciate that. Carla?
The thing I like about this is, just from like an overall perspective, when you improve systems, you're saving money. You're saving money, you're saving resources. So when people say, how do you get money out of a budget? This is how, by being more efficient, you get money out of the budget. And then when you're cutting down people's work that isn't directly related to student education, then you're able to spend that time doing other things. So this is how you pull money out of a budget. It's great to see. So thank you.
So this seems like really exciting work, and I love hearing that you came to these, these particulars in such a collaborative way with the input from our principals, from district leadership. Like, that's really, really encouraging to hear. Will this be reflected in the individual school improvement plans, or is this work separate from some of those initiatives we should expect to see in school improvement plans.
I think the goal is to have the alignment all the way through school improvement plans and even further down into principal goals, staff member goals, things like that. I also think the other reality too is that we haven't been, in terms of timing, this is next year, we'd be a little further ahead with getting these out. And we know it took time for our team to work together, to calibrate, to kind of do this work together. So I think, will things be as aligned this year as we hope sort of in the future? Probably not. But should you see through lines of what we're doing here in the SIPs and then goals? Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And if one point on that too, these are broad enough too, that we think there's enough that people can latch onto. And we've talked about as a team, we think next year we might even need to be a little bit more specific. We weren't comfortable doing that yet until we had a little bit more time as a team.
Yeah, understood.
All right, I think, moving on then.
So shifting into superintendent goals. So I think this is a process I am really excited about. I think you hopefully will see through lines between what I'll propose as my own goals with what we just discussed. And I'm also, another thing I'm excited about this process is I believe in the evaluation process. I'm really excited about just getting continuous feedback from the committee and from the larger community just on sort of things that I am doing in my own leadership that's helping to move things forward and also ways that I could be more effective for our students, staff, and family. So tonight I'm going to outline a couple of things. First, 4 goals. So I am required as a superintendent to outline goals across 3 areas: district improvement goals, professional practice goals, and student learning goals. So I'll outline each of those tonight. Also, a recommended best practice through DESE is also to identify 6 to 8 focus indicators from the rubric. So as you know, the school committee will evaluate my performance not only against these goals, but also against the rubric, against all indicators on the rubric, but we'd like to call attention to a few that we feel are especially, relevant for my own leadership and for our team this year. So I'm going to outline some of these goals. The first 3 goals are ones that are taken directly from DESE. These are the 3 goals that are recommended for new superintendents. So I've taken those verbatim. I am hopeful that tonight we can workshop them a little bit, as I think there's ways we can make them more relevant for our Reading context, but wanted to put it out there in the committee to have this conversation on the floor. And then the last goal is one that sort of we designed internally as our own team that I'll speak to as well. So first goal, effective entry and direction setting. The goal reads, again, for those who can't see the screen, by late spring, the district will have broad recognition by key stakeholder groups about the district's most critical needs, and will have a widely understood process underway to identify the strategies and goals that will address those needs most effectively and the measures that will be used to assess progress. So this all ties to the entry plan. I think I want to emphasize on this that the goal of the entry process is not for me to sit and learn about the district and then to keep that information sort of to myself. The goal is for us, through this process, develop a shared understanding of where we are as a community. So my hope is that as I interact with the community, as I learn more, and as I keep you posted on the things that I'm learning, we start to develop a shared understanding of, as a community, or what are some of the strengths in our district, what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the opportunities to move us forward. So I think this goal really focuses on my ability to make what I'm learning, communicate that out and make that widely known and develop a shared understanding across the entire community. I've talked through some of the parts of my entry plan, so I'm not going to dive into that in detail here, but you can see some of the key actions and benchmarks related to the entry plan. Goal 2 relates to maintaining momentum during the transition. The goal reads, keep the district moving forward during this year's transition in leadership by working with principals and other district leaders to ensure that meaningful progress is made on critical district and school goals. I think it's important as a superintendent I do 2 things this year. First, I listen to learn, and I think that goes to the entry process. I can't effectively move the district forward unless I deeply understand the needs of our community. I think that relates to goal 1. And there's a reality that there's work to be done and we need to move the district forward. And hopefully that you've seen by now, not just me, but our entire team is not, going to live in that listening and learning phase solely, but we are committed to moving things forward. Hopefully you see that, sort of right away. But this points on sort of my goal of, in addition to learning, moving some of those key areas forward that we just spoke about and actually living out some of those action steps that we discussed. So you'll see that reflected in some of those key actions and benchmarks that are described in more detail. This is all in the packet too, so I'm not going to go through every piece in detail here. This is the most straightforward goal. This is a expectation for everyone who participates in the new superintendent induction program to have this professional practice goal, which reads to develop the skills and strategy development, data analysis, and instructional leadership by actively engaging in the first year of the new superintendent induction program. So being actively involved in that cohort with myself and the other 35 plus new superintendents across the state. I feel very fortunate to have Chris McGrath. I think everyone knows Chris by now as my new superintendent coach. Chris is with us a lot. The team knows Chris well. She's been at principal meetings. She's been at a central office meeting last week. She's out and about with us giving, consistent coaching and feedback, which I think is one of the most exciting parts of this program. But again, part of my own goal is to complete the program within sort of the expectations of the program. Those three are the goals that are proposed by DESE verbatim. This last goal is one that is sort of created by us internally as a team. Simply put, the goal 4 around coaching, developing, and supporting principals is design and implement a district strategy for coaching, supporting, and developing principal talent. We realize that one of the things that's come up from a lot of different stakeholders so far is that this is a major sort of gap of where we are now, what we could be doing to better move the needle in student achievement. So, for those who love research and, sort of analyzing sort of the best practice in the field, there was recently a study last spring from the Wallace Foundation that came out that said 2 things. One, that the role and the impact of the principal is more significant than they had previously believed. Right? I think that's a testament to the principals. I think they feel that. 2, which I found really interesting, quite possibly they say the highest leverage strategy to improve student outcomes is by investing in cultivating in school leadership. So we think about all the different things that we can do to move the needle on student outcomes. And that report, from a reputable, source cites, coaching, supporting, developing principal talent as sort of the best lever to move to improve outcomes. I think for those of you who've been in schools, you can see why that could be sort of their conclusion. So what does that mean for us? I think what that means for us is we want to, as a team, central office team and team of principals, ground ourselves in what are the research say and the best practices in supporting principals. How does that align with where we are right now and sort of the support, coaching, and that principals get? And then what are the ways that we close that gap for principals? We've already started to live some of this out. You've heard a little bit about some of our operational huddles. You may have heard a little bit about some of the one-to-one coaching we're doing, about some of the networks of collaboration amongst principals. So we're starting to kick this work off, but we just wanted to emphasize today that we are really investing this year in the development of our principals. And that's not just a top-down thing where we try to tell principals what to do, but we build effective structures and collaboration between principals too. So this is something that our team is excited about. I'll pause there on the goals, and then I'll move into talking about just some of our focus indicators. If there's any questions on goals.
Anybody?
Maybe just a comment if I could. So I would have given you full credit if you just pulled the ones from the model system, but I love this 4th goal, and you talked about stakeholders that highlighted this as a need throughout the process. My understanding, I think the principals were one of those groups of stakeholders, and I think, our principals, both the returning ones and the new ones, are one of the real strengths of the district, and the fact that they're still hungry for, sort of development is a real testament. So I'm thrilled to see this one up here. I'm thrilled to see where we go with it. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
And to a couple of points that Sean raises there. The first is just to highlight, we have some of the best principals. I think it is a joy for us every day to see the work that they're doing, and they're really impressive people and impressive leaders. And the second thing is that this work, there's not a lot of districts who are doing this well. Like this is not, we realize we have some improvement to do in this area, but so do a lot of districts. So I think that that's just for us, it's important to recognize that this is not something that we're like necessarily behind in. It's a state of affairs sort of across the ed sector that there's a lot of work to do in this area, and we're excited to try to do this work really well.
Anybody else? We kind of went flying past the benchmarks as part of the portions there, and I think there's something we can do a little bit in that space, and you and I traded notes a little bit on it earlier, about how do we sharpen them from a SMART perspective and have enough evidence come May timeframe, because that's really the time we need to talk about it, to demonstrate the effectiveness of the goal and the effectiveness that you're demonstrating in delivering that goal. So as we look at, I think, goal number 2, I think, was in benchmark 3, sort of, go to benchmarks, yeah. So number 3, I think, when I first read it, I was thinking that's presupposing a certain thing. I think now what I'm understanding is a little bit different. It's you're not getting in the way, right? They're meeting or exceeding their goals of things. I'd like to see if we can do something more than that, though. If we can, measure that you're effectively helping to deliver, not just not getting in the way, right? Or anything else along that line. And this somewhat ties to benchmark 4 as well, and the return there is, how do we measure from the principal feedback perspective that the feedback is, as we expect it to be, strong, it's supporting their work, they're growing from it as they're desiring, that it's relevant, that it's timely, that it supports the student growth as well. Maybe there's a survey-related thing there. You mentioned in the response to me, you were thinking about 360 type review process. I'd be fully supportive of that type of concept. And it aligns with the transparency-related stuff we've talked about as well, and the overall collaboration, right? That we continue to see, and we're continually, I think, universally very appreciative of and feedback-wise. So I'd love to see if we can do a little bit more in some of the goals to get some meat on the bones, for lack of a better say. And what are we striving for in measuring that as successful, right? I don't have specific examples necessarily tonight in terms of how to make it a little smarter, for lack of a better way to say. But I think that's something, as we think about it, as we move forward to the 14th when we approve this, that there's something there that we can say, yes, by May, we will have done X, and it will show us, we expect it to show us this, right? And that's something we need to understand. Does that make sense, Tom?
It does. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm in 100% agreement, too, of just adding a little bit more kind of teeth to some of these benchmarks. I think the idea that in our conversation earlier, you shared some of the survey ideas. I think those are great ideas. So in the next step, on these proposed goals, I'll add in a little bit more that will kind of show some progress and some evidence, particularly from the people who may be on the receiving end of some of this work, too. So
yes.
I think that's great feedback. Thank you.
And tying back into the number 3 goal, I think, which is the new superintendent, if Chris could give us, more substantive, not just that you participated, okay, we're not looking for that bar, we're looking for, you're exceeding, you're doing really well in that program, you're actively participating, if they ask you to go look at some other district from a coaching perspective or evaluation perspective, whatever it is that they're doing, we want to see that you're excelling in that, and that Chris's feedback is not just, yeah, he participated and he actively engaged. That seems to be too low of a bar, frankly. So I think if there's something there that we can talk to Chris about that she feels is meaty enough to provide as well as part of this benchmark, that would be good to see from my perspective as well.
Thank you. And then the other point, Tom and I discussed earlier too, was on goal 4, the last benchmark, and I apologize, all the numbers are the same, all number 1s, that we may not have sort of an analysis of statewide growth measures at the time of sort of the end of the evaluation time. So leaning in on some of the other ones here around maybe common assessment data that we might have, but even also student work samples, evidence of teacher instructional practices, things that are more formative assessments that may show some of this work of supporting principals as having an impact. So I appreciate that other point that you raised too.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Tom, is that it from this, or is there more?
Last piece too, and this is probably a little bit quicker, is that the DESE recommends narrowing the rubric down, which you may see sort of the superintendent rubric, performance rubric, several different indicators across 4 different standards. There's a recommendation to narrow it down to 6 to 8. We've picked 6 that I think are reflected in the goals and the action steps that we've already talked about tonight. The first, data-informed decision-making. It reads, uses multiple sources of evidence related to student learning, including state, district, and school assessment, results in growth data to inform school and district goals and improve organizational performance, educator effectiveness, and student learning. That part sits primarily in that, where we were talking about the acceleration roadmap. So I think that's why we've highlighted this as an area that we're really focusing on. Second, environment develops and executes effective plans, procedures, routines, and operational systems to address a full range of safety, health, emotional, social needs. In your minds, you could probably already connect where that goes to our action steps. That's the strategy one, those operational systems. Number 3, I don't think I need to read this one in much detail. It's human resource management and development. It speaks about recruiting, hiring, development. I think you can see the alignment there between, that and strategy 4. Last 3, these are ones that there may not be as explicit of as a connection to the goals, but we think sort of are related to all of them. First, communication. Effective two-way communication we realize is critical, especially with so many new administrators in the entry process, but communicating with families in a culturally proficient way, and especially around student learning and performance. Other one, commitment to high standards. We've talked about this a lot. We want a really high bar for our students. We should be held to that same bar, our administrative team and myself especially. And then the last piece, which I think connects the entry process in general, shared vision, right? And how do we create a shared vision for where we are as a community and where we want to go? Those 6 jumped out to us because we felt there was those best resembled the work on our plate this year. Again, in terms of the evaluation, the school committee will evaluate me on not only those goals, but also all of the indicators, but these are ones that we'll probably provide a little bit more evidence on and focus on a little bit more sort of this year in our work.
Any discussion on that from the committee? So it is a practice change for us to follow that model. And so I think that's something we just need to get comfortable with. Well, at least maybe I do, since nobody else is asking a question. I think these are the right ones completely, based upon the goals and the strategy focus that we have in mind. And in watching, once again, some of the training on this, it essentially means, and this is what I have to get comfortable with, that if other areas are not achieving in some way, shape, or form, we throw it out from the year-end assessment, in terms of the roll-up assessment, the summative. And that's my challenge, right? I don't know if everybody else has the same challenge, but that's my challenge. I do agree these are the 6 most important in looking through them. I would have loved to tie in a few more, but I think these are the 6 most important. I want to get comfortable before we make this decision, so I'd like the committee to think about it before the 14th, when we're finalizing this, that we're on the same page, that these are the 6, and we're comfortable to rate only these 6, really, in terms of the summative relationship. We can still mark them from other proficiency levels, but they don't impact the overall summative score if we agree to this model. And so I just want people to be aware of that and think through that as we go through it. Sean, I see you have something you're going to say.
Yeah, so I had a different understanding of how the focus indicators apply. I read it or understood it to be more of a, weighting, and as Tom said, this is where you focus your sort of evidence base. But, if you'd ask me, how does this work? And I'd say, we all rated an E in data-informed decision-making, but one of the lower scores for the other 5 in that first standard, he's probably not an E in the overall rating, right? So that had been my understanding. So I'd be curious to see what specifically you watched that suggested otherwise, because I'd internalized it more as we are just sort of planting a flag to say, for this standard, this is sort of the indicator that we think is the priority, but there is an expectation of performance and success against all of them. So that's how I read it, but obviously we.
Yeah, I mean, there was a specific video on the DESE site that I was watching that said that, and they said, well, if you choose the 8, in this case it was the 8 instead of the 6, those are the ones that you're going to use from the summative top level number. The other ones are important and you should rate them, but if there's a negative, it doesn't negatively impact the top level number. And so that's, one of the things, we have to come to that common understanding, I guess, especially as we go into May and June and we figure out how we're going to roll up from the collective 6 of us to that summative. Maybe it's a weighting mechanism to a degree, Sean, as you're saying. If we put these, they all have a rating of 3 or 4 or 5, and everything else has a rating of 1. So it overall weights things. They also kind of dissuade against weighting to a degree too. So it's kind of an interesting problem to answer. It doesn't prevent us providing commentary or feedback on any of those other categories. It doesn't prevent us from rating them. But my understanding, and I can try and find the video in particular, because it was a very specific question and answer, which I was kind of surprised by, said you're basically throwing those out from the overall summative roll-up score. Tom's nodding, so I think he's watched the same video, but.
I did watch, I think it was the same video. I think I can share my interpretation and then also just what I saw in the video. I think, first, I'll get some additional context on this. I think my interpretation was that I would be assessed on all of them, and that's what I'm most comfortable with, and I think they should all count. I wouldn't want there just to be one that counts. I think there's a rubric for a reason and should be evaluated against all of them. They all matter. So that's my hope, and I'll kind of look to make sure that we're going through a path that allows that. The video, the part I saw was interesting, where it sounds like if there was one indicator where there could have been needs improvement, someone was recommending, instead of giving someone needs improvement, maybe that becomes the focus indicator for the superintendent next year as like an area for them to prioritize and to focus on. So it sounded like instead of marking them down necessarily on that, then make that a priority area next year. I'm not sure if I agree with that sort of intent anyway, but I don't know if that's the same video same part you were watching.
That was the answer for not including it in the impact of this year, was essentially, okay, so it doesn't count in the focus indicators this year, so add it to next year if there's enough it becomes a focus item next year, but doesn't impact this year's score. I think we're all expecting it to be an overall great year, so I'm not looking at it from that perspective, but I also want to make sure we plant the right flag with regards to expectations on a go-forward basis, because it's not just year 1 that matters, it's year 15 that matters too, as we go through this. So considering that as we think about it.
Good. Perfect. I'll get some additional context. And we're not looking forward to year 15 yet.
Okay, 14.
14.
Erin, you look like you wanted to say something.
No,
I misreading?
I'm very curious about all of this. I wouldn't want to only rate the 6, I'll be honest. Like, I would definitely want to rate all of them, because I do think they all matter. It makes perfect sense why you highlighted these 6. They fit with what you're going to be working on, so I agree with that. But I think it's important when we go to rate you that we're giving you feedback on everything for your own growth as well as, just the feedback. So I'm curious about this video now.
Yeah, I think they didn't say you can't rate them and you shouldn't rate them. It's just that if you think about this and you roll it up, it's like which ones weigh the total number for, competency 4, which ones weigh the total number for competency 3. And if there's 2 here and though both are, I'll just say exceeding, and the other ones are needs improvement, then those are the 2 you're supposed to take, because that's the focus. That's my interpretation.
Okay.
I may have been not fully listening if I missed something there, but I think that's something we want to calibrate on, because I don't want to come into May and June and have a completely different understanding. If that makes sense.
Is that a video you can
Yeah, it's on the
share?
DESE one. I can find it again and share it through the
So we're all
appropriate
getting the
channels.
same information?
Right.
So Tom, are you making that judgment on this as a first-year evaluation or just as an overall evaluation?
Both, really. Like I said, we had this debate as a committee last year or 2 years ago. Not everybody on the committee was on the committee at that point in time, about whether we're going to, go to focus indicators and only look at 6 or only look at 8, or if we wanted to look at all. And at that time, we didn't get comfortable with looking at only 6 and calling them focus indicators. Doesn't mean that we can't now. I wanted to think about it not just as a first-year thing, but as again, we're setting a standard to a degree with the first year, and is this what we want to do, right? It's a practice, it's a guideline, because there is a focus. You need to focus, right? You can't do everything at once.
Right.
So that's why it's a good practice, why it's a guideline. But at the same time, what does that mean for us in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 15, as the case may be? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Tom, anything else on that?
Thank you.
Any other committee questions? Looking around? Nope. Okay. I'm going to take this back. You don't have the.
Curtis.
Curtis, thank you, sir. You don't have anything on here for.
We're good with that.
Data for the face covering stuff?
No, it's just in the packet.
Okay.
I can pull it up if we need to.
I have the packet as well. So we have mine. Did you guys also provide one?
We did, and let's see if you have it in,
I Got your email.
It's in the email, and then there's a hard copy here in the packet. I believe.
Well, while we switch that, I'll switch over, because we're going to switch
Did you get a hard copy?
anyway.
Oh, right before that stuff.
Tom, do you have it written? If you do, we can just go through it that way, and then we can come back. Or I'll start with what we have here, and then we'll work from there.
You maybe just pull up the email if you have that too.
Yes,
that
I
has-
can do that too if necessary.
Okay.
Moving it over here in case we do decide to put this on video. So this is the continuation really of our conversation on the face coverings policy. As we promised, we will be reviewing the data on a relatively regular basis, generally about monthly at this point in time. There might be a reason for us to have a conversation on the 14th as well, based upon where where DESE is with their guidelines and guidance. But in terms of the state data, which is the shared responsibility that I chose with Tom, we have some of the vaccination numbers for Reading overall. The email we received, and we'll go through that shortly, includes our school vaccination numbers. But from a Reading overall and a Boston overall perspective, we do see that about an 8.3% rise in fully vaccinated 12 to 15-year-olds in Reading. So it's to 72.52% according to the state data. Conversely, for the 16 to 19-year-olds, it's about a 3.9% increase, 3.8% increase. And so that's also going up to a high number. It's 92.4. So we're not going to grow as fast when we're already that high, right? As you move to Boston, it is a little bit of a different situation. Obviously, this isn't our students necessarily, but portions of our students could be in this population. We do see the 12 to 15-year-old numbers did increase rather significantly by 12.3%. And though it should say 16 to 19, that's an error in my typo, I apologize. 16 to 19 went up by 4.3%. So the 16 to 19-year-olds in Boston are only at 41% right now, which is a potential point of concern. But ultimately what matters is who is in our schools, and all of our students. And then looking forward to some of the 14-day rolling data that we promised we would be looking at. Here in this chart is the data as it existed when we last met on this topic. We have the incidence rate on the left side and the case count on the right side, where the orange line is the case count, and the blue fill is the incidence rate. And we can see that there was a spike that was happening, but what we also now see in the most recent data is that spike continued, and only in the last reporting period did it start going down. So that's a positive that we are going down. It's not necessarily a positive that we went up that high, but it is a positive that we have started going down now. When you look at Middlesex, using the same data but looking at the whole county, which is also what we agreed to look at, you see similar trends, although it has not started going down yet from a Middlesex perspective, which impacts us from a athletic league and other, staffing perspective as well. Then I looked at a couple other points of data as people were challenging me on different things. So the hospitalization data that we see here, once again, we start to see it flattening out from a state perspective. And that's a positive. It hasn't started going down, maybe slightly downtick. But what you see down here, the yellow and below are the school-age children that would be in our schools, not counting staff, but we don't want to discount staff. What we see is interesting here in the hospitalization rates, at the end of this reporting period, 1.5% of the people in the hospitals, statewide, this isn't Reading, this isn't Middlesex, this is statewide, they don't break this down by county or by town. Only 1.5% were in the 0 to 19 range, which is a good thing. Conversely, if you look at the overall case counts, again, statewide, you have a similar trend and a similar graph, unfortunately. But you have very different numbers in terms of the distribution of who's getting sick, for lack of a better way to say it. So we see a relatively consistent trend by population group versus what we saw before from a hospitalization perspective. So while 28% of the total members, people getting COVID, are in the 0 to 19 range, only 1.5% of the total going is in the hospital. Conversely, our 60-plus is obviously getting much more impacted. As you see, the 13.57 of the total cases is 60-plus, but over 50% of the hospitalizations are 60-plus. So that's a somewhat consistent number with COVID from last year, unfortunately. But from a school perspective, does inform us about how students are a bit more resilient. One other thing I wanted to look at, as people were asking questions as well, is the hospitalization percentages from an ICU, intubation, and then the state has started releasing vaccination percentages and rates. And what we have here now is, as of the end of the period, unfortunately, it's about 35% of the hospitalized people over a 2-week period are previously vaccinated. So the vaccination, there's questions there about what we want to interpret from that from a data perspective. We see a relatively static number from an ICU and intubation perspective, but the vaccination rate is increasing. If you do expand this out to the full set of data where vaccination started being reported, which was right around the middle of August, you see a similar trend from a vaccination perspective, but you see a slight trend upwards in both the ICU and intubation perspectives. Just a slight one, but it is there. But I chose the start of school essentially as the point for this one, just to see what we were seeing in that regard. And so those are key points. The last one that the state provides is cluster transmissions. And this was important from my perspective to see where people are getting sick. And this cluster transmission show that over 90% of the people getting sick are getting it from their own family members in their own household. In a cluster. Doesn't mean 90% of everybody getting sick, but anybody in a cluster where there's more than one person getting sick in some grouping. Conversely, from a school perspective, we see a very positive number that only 0.16% of the people at K through 12 schools are in the cluster or getting sick and in school, which can be a very positive thing from a perspective of the remediations we've done from an air conditioning, from a ventilation, from a masking, from a, some people call it the Swiss cheese effect of trying to solve the problem, multiple layers of problem solution. And you see a slightly increased number when you think about childcare. I put that in there because I think that's where our RISE population fits technically. And so those numbers are available. So from a data perspective, we are starting to flatten out, maybe potentially come down depending on your scope of focus, whether it's Reading or Middlesex or the state. But we are seeing an increased number of hospitalizations for those that have already received the vaccine as well. So I'll pause there and let me find the email that we had as well and go from there. Okay, so my mouse, there it is. Of course, I lost the mouse again. So Tom, do you want to walk through this while I find things and scroll down?
Sure. So we have a couple additional data points on here just for our review tonight. First piece you see here in writing is the vaccination rates per school by staff. So we as staff were expected to share proof of their vaccination status by last Friday. And then our nursing staff and our HR staff started to compile all and organize all that data during the beginning of this week. I think we realized two things sort of were barriers for us as we put that together. The first is on Monday, DESE released additional guidance around people who also needed to be included in the calculations. That included athletic coaches, part-time staff, after-school staff. So people who we did not originally reach out to provide sort of proof of vaccination status, we then are sort of scrambling to get theirs. So that data has been trickling in, and then the other piece has been also that staff, just not everyone sort of met that deadline on the expectation last Friday, and there's a few trickling in now too. So our team is continuing to compile them. I would say I'm encouraged that over the past few days, we feel like we've gotten most of them. But what we didn't want today was to provide inaccurate or sort of inconclusive data. So by the meeting on the 14th, we will absolutely have a better understanding of where we stand as a district by school and sort of district as a whole. And then moving into student vaccination rates. So we haven't seen a ton of movement at the high school level from the last time we reported. You see up there at least 85% of our high school students here at RMHS have 85% have at least one dose, and then 83% fully vaccinated. We have seen the numbers start to trickle up a little bit at the middle school level. You see here at Parker, 58% of the students have at least one dose, was 61% at Coolidge. Scrolling down a little bit, and this chart got messed up a little bit in translation, so I'll resolve that and have that fixed up for a revised version of the packet tomorrow. But know that what we're seeing total is we've had 39 total cases across all of our schools. And if you kind of look down in just the new case column, I know it got a little messed up there on 9/7 and 9/10. There hasn't been like a major, if we look day by day, it's been pretty consistently low across the first few weeks of school. We've had a couple of, out of school transmissions in certain instances that have boosted the number up on a particular day. But we feel, kept the numbers relatively low at 39 so far across the beginning of the school year. I think the next data point is what we're most encouraged about, which is as of September 28th, there's been 138 in-school close contacts. Every one of those are student close contacts. All 138 students have elected, or their families have elected, to participate in test and stay, totaling a total of 487 rapid tests. All 487 have come back negative. So you can run the math to think if we had 138 students as close contacts, if they had to engage in the traditional quarantine process, what that would mean in terms of learning loss. This data is encouraging for a couple of reasons. First, it shows that what's happening in our schools in terms of reducing transmission is really, really working. A testament to our teachers for what they're doing at the classroom level, our custodial staff, our nurses, sort of everyone in the building who has helped our students, everyone who's helping to reduce transmission. To not have any in-school transmission yet is really encouraging for us, so just appreciate everyone abiding by the protocols that we've set in place. The second thing that's encouraging for us is the fact that we have test and stay up and running. I know this has been a challenge in a lot of neighboring districts around just operationalizing this, getting supplies. I have a ton of gratitude for Mary Juliana and her leadership in getting test and stay up and running. A huge amount of appreciation, gratitude to our nurses who are doing this on a daily basis. But to be able to have a program up and running that has really kept students in school, it shows that it's really working, and it's had a tremendous impact, especially on those 138 students. So I'll pause there and see if there's just any questions or things that people want to dive into.
Sarah?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, again, I'm excited to see the numbers are fairly low. Clearly, our multi-layer mitigation strategy is really working, given community transmission rates are still fairly high in our town and in our county and surrounding areas. So that's really exciting to see. I'd also like to just emphasize and underline the fact that we've done 487 tests in a month, I think, and those are all being done by our nurses who have full-time jobs. So I think we can't emphasize enough that we're asking them to do a lot of extra work. And continue to have the dialogue around how we can continue to recognize that and support it.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah.
Anybody else? Karen?
I'll just piggyback on that I am so grateful that we have been doing the test and stay program from the beginning. I know people in other districts in the state that did not have the capacity up and running, and kids were missing, full weeks of school in the beginning of the school year because they had to quarantine because the district didn't have test and stay up and running. So it made me very, very grateful that we were able to implement that so quickly. And I mean, we see how much we needed it. That's 138 students that were able to stay in school. So I'm very, very grateful to Mary and our nursing staff and to everyone who helped to ensure that we could have that in place, because really the goal is to keep kids in school, keep kids healthy, but keep kids in school as well. So just gratitude.
Anybody else? No? I'll just echo that briefly and say I'm glad we all agreed last time we met to fund the floating nurse as well. and find a way to make that happen. I think we're pretty close to
We
filling
are.
that position, as far as I understand, which is great and will help alleviate some of that. We may have to have a conversation at a later point in time about whether we need additional, but for the time being, we'll start with a one and work our way from there. So, thank you to Mary, thank you to you, thank you to everybody who put this all together, all the nurses that are, on the ground working it through. I've heard from some people anecdotally that, they get 5, 6 calls as a result of the process, and it's a lot of back and forth, and that's a lot of time, having that many conversations with 138 students, not to mention the ones that might have been close contacts but weren't close contacts, and things along those lines. So it's a lot of extra time they're putting in, and the appreciation in that level. Tom, I was wondering if there's anything that we've been able to do to see, overall trends. Are we seeing it at, I think we have more at Killam than other places. Are there any other trends that we've been able to pull out in terms of the relationship of how or when these are happening? Or I don't see a relationship to a weekend as an example, or anything else. Have we been able to see anything else from a trend perspective?
We haven't been able to pull out really any trends. We know that sometimes there was one family example that had 3 siblings and they all tested positive, and that accounted for, one of the days of having a higher uptick. But we haven't seen any like major events or days of the week or sort of things that have been spreaders. I'd like to share just one anecdote. I was in a 3rd grade class the other day, and one of the teachers said, "I'm just so encouraged to see now that it's not sharing books that's spreading, sort of COVID-19. So back to sort of the collaborative learning in small groups, that those sort of things are working, and we're not, spreading COVID-19 through those sort of practices that we think are best for learning. We are looking closely at data to try to identify other trends, but just really haven't pulled many out. But if any in the community sees some, please let us know.
Okay, great. So the other, at the end of the memo, another thing for us to consider, while we all know, and I think the community knows now, that DSE has extended the mask mandate through November 1st. They've also provided a quote-unquote off-ramp for districts if they want to provide or prove that a school in particular has an 80% vaccination rate, both for students and staff, that district could avail themselves of that school having the off-ramp. And that's the only case that exists or could exist for us right now is the high school. But we are gathering the data for it if we need to do that. I wanted to take a temperature from a committee perspective while this is on the agenda. What are people's thoughts about that overall idea? Do we even want to entertain it at this current time, or do we want to wait for other data that we've been looking at to go down? And just, we're here. I see Sarah vehemently nodding. So we're here as a group. It's on the agenda. I just want to make sure we have a chance to talk about it. Sarah?
I'm letting my public health degree hang out here, sorry. I think that certainly having the conversation is important to make sure we're continually checking in on this stuff and understanding where all of our heads are at. I think the vaccination rate is important. It's one piece of data. We're in super high transmission as a community, as a county, as a state. There are a lot of other mitigating factors as well. So I think certainly the conversation can be had, but I don't think we can make a decision based on one piece of data.
Okay. Anybody else? Erin?
So I had asked Tom a question yesterday, and I will completely forgive you if you don't have the answer to it because it was just yesterday, but I was seeking clarity around the test and stay protocol, and I know if students are deemed to be a close contact, but they're vaccinated and masked, then they don't have to, participate in test and stay, they don't have to quarantine. If they are vaccinated and unmasked, does that change things?
I'm glad you brought that up. So when I went back through the guidance yesterday, after our conversation, the guidance said asymptomatic vaccinated individuals are not considered close contacts and are sort of exempt from test and stay. Yet I remember at some point us having the conversation of there being sort of masks playing some sort of role in sort of the high school level. I don't remember what that was. So let me figure out what that is and get back to you on that. Because
again, we obviously want to keep our students and staff healthy, but it's also extremely important to me that we are keeping them in school. And to me, masks is like such a small price to pay if that means that we are able to keep kids in school. So I would love some clarity on that.
But even if they were deemed a close contact without the mask, they would still be allowed to participate in test and stay. They would, right? They wouldn't.
That's the conversation to have. I mean, I think Senator Lewis's office put together a flow chart, which I'm not 100% sure aligns with the DSC flow chart. I think that's where the confusion's happening. So if we look at that and we look at the DSC flow chart, we should have clarity about that and have that ready for the discussion if we add it to the agenda for the 14th. Because it is a key factor. We don't want them to be quarantined, even if they're asymptomatic and not wearing a mask. We need them to stay in school. And so whatever, I guess, I'll put this out there, it's just an opinion of one person, whatever it takes to keep them in school is what we need to figure out how to do. If something doesn't let them stay in school, then we have another challenge. Go ahead, Erin.
The other thing I wonder about, if at some point we go this way and repeal masks at the high school, which I'm not saying I'm ready to do, students who are not vaccinated are still expected to wear a mask. So how are we monitoring that? Because I already hear complaints that students aren't wearing masks properly. We have staff not wearing masks properly. I mean, I've heard this many times already. We have, extracurricular groups that are not reinforcing masks in our buildings. But so how, what are we going to do? Like, it feels like the scarlet letter. Like, how are we not shaming kids? But at the same time, if you're not vaccinated, they should be wearing masks, even if we take masks away from the vaccinated. So I think that adds a whole other element of like, how is that going to be monitored and reinforced to think about down the line?
I think that, and we can obviously, this could be part of our policy conversation when we get to there. What you're referring to, though, is specifically the DSE mandate, where if we take off the masks by the 15th, for those that are vaccinated, those that are unvaccinated have to, according to their mandate. If they relax the overall mandate on the 1st and say that's no longer a mandate, it goes back to our policy, and it's a conversation about what the policy says. And if we decide at the policy level to say, we're at 95% vaccination, nobody needs to wear a mask because the scarlet letter is not what we want them to have to deal with, right? That's a conversation we can have November 1st or sometime past that. But I think those are the kind of the gives and takes that we've got to work our way through.
A couple of thoughts just to add in here too on a couple of points. First, I wish I had Mary Julian. I could phone a friend on that last question, but I'm trying to leave her alone tonight and give her but I did find up the guidance, and it is asymptomatic vaccinated individuals are exempt, they're from being sort of test and stay. Where the distinction came is if students were in a classroom and masked and a student was unvaccinated, right? That student had a mask on and was at least 3 feet apart, they're not considered a close contact. So that's where that distinction was really for an unvaccinated individual. So Mary could have told you that much quicker. I just also like to emphasize the idea of having to enforce some students wear a mask and others not is a nightmare for an administrator.
Yep.
And I don't think that's something that our administrative team would be thrilled to get behind, so.
Okay, any other comments on this, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I just, the numbers feel small, and they are small in the grand scheme of things, but I do want to sort of put them in one piece of context. If we took the high school as sort of our call it best case vaccination rate for now, I think we still have about 1 in 6 students at the high school that aren't vaccinated, give or take. I think what that would mean is that if we had 1 in 6 students who were both unvaccinated and then unmasked at some point, the 138 students who are currently eligible for test and stay, 1 in 6 of those would have had to go home and been marked absent, right? So you're talking, 20, 25 students who would have had to go home just in the first month of school because they wouldn't have been eligible for test and stay under those circumstances. So I'm with Sarah. I don't think we're quite at a place yet where, I'm ready to sort of take the off-ramp personally. I still have concerns about, the one example of clustering we do have is in the household. I still have concerns about the, sort of multi-school families, of which we have many. And so, I think we have to keep those things in mind as we explore the off-ramp and explore what happens on November 1 as well.
Yeah, just to be clear, that clustering did not happen in our schools.
I understand.
Right,
No,
so
I understand.
We got to be
Yeah,
very
sorry.
clear about
Yeah.
that. Just happens to be, and there's others. We have a few family clusters in our list necessarily as it stands right now. I think to Sean's point, I think that's also a follow-up, and Tom, if you still have it up, is the unvaccinated, unmasked, obviously automatically quarantined, or can they still go to test and stay if they're unsymptomatic, right? If they're symptomatic, that's a different story. But if they're not, they're asymptomatic, unmasked, unvaccinated, that's a different story. And I think as well, of the 39 that we've seen, the great majority are in the elementary levels, right? So let's not say 39 would be, one
It's
sixth
fair.
of
Yeah,
that,
it's
right?
fair. I'm just
So we
rough
just have to
number,
be-
just
we
rough
have to be
numbers here, just
careful
putting it in
about how we
context
look
that,
at it, yeah.
I want to recognize that that may translate to dozens of students not being able to come to school for a period of time and being marked absent because we don't have options once we send them home. So that's, just want to put that in context, that's all.
Yep. Okay. Anything else on this agenda item before we move on? All right. So we're moving on to the surplus equipment. Susan, would you like to walk us through it?
Sure, I'll be happy to share with you this evening. Included in your packet is a letter requesting that school committee declare some property surplus. And this is property that was identified and compiled during the summer months by our staff while cleaning and setting up the school buildings for back to school. Some of these pieces of equipment and furniture have reached the end of their useful life. Some are broken, some are damaged. What we're looking for is a declaration of surplus. At that next step, these pieces of equipment will be moved out of our buildings and reevaluated, offered to other departments in the town. We'd follow proper protocol in terms of their disposal. I understand that a declaration of surplus property comes before school committee periodically, and this is the list of what we have following our summer review.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the committee?
Do you want a motion
Before I
first?
do that, yeah, Sean, do we have a motion?
I move to declare surplus equipment as detailed in the packet.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Sarah seconded this time.
I raised my hand too.
All right, now, any discussion or questions on the surplus equipment? I'll just ask a simple fundamental one. I'm assuming some of these ones, the bookcases, tables, chairs, are kind of non-functional anymore. They're broken, there's other problems with them, not just that we don't need them anymore.
Absolutely. These are unusable. I have another list that's not included in the packet this evening of furniture and equipment that was identified during the summer as not being needed at a particular school. So I've been working with our facilities team to find a place to store those items for reallocation when we need them.
Okay. I'll note that there is evidence of some of that outside downstairs on Main Street right now. As Mr. Tracy noticed something, and he's like, nope, let's use those. And he's sort of created a pseudo cafe style downstairs on the Main Street that didn't used to exist for students when they come in or when they're at Flex Block or something like that, that they may have a ability to go study on Main Street or something
I
like
was
that. So
admiring that the other night.
I-
I said, this
I
still
love it
used to be
'cause
here, but I love it.
I think it also fosters a sense of community in Main Street that maybe wasn't there before, and I think it's a phenomenal idea that he implemented there, so. And that's an example of surplus equipment that we found a use for, that we didn't declare surplus, but we found a use for. Okay. Any other conversation? Nope. All right, so the motion on the table, all in favor by hand raise, aye. All opposed? And the motion passes 5-0. Thank you. All right, so moving on to new business, we have the collective bargaining agreement with the cafeteria's employees. Dr. Milczewski, do you want to walk us through the changes involved in that? Or Susan, sorry, you're doing that?
Sure, yes, I'm happy to do that. Included in your packet is an outline of a number of different 8 or 9 items that have changed within our food service contractual agreement. Our union service fee has changed, the language has changed, offering staff the opportunity to elect to join and pay a service fee to the union. The old language is that they were required to pay a fee to the union. The second is a change in work schedule. In certain situations, the food service director can change staff workers' hours by an hour in order to accommodate special events, half-days, other events that are taking place in the school building. Participation in the food distribution program. The director of food service has the right to schedule employees for extra hours in order for us to participate in the distribution of food through the federal program. The director will give our staff members a 1-week notice so they can plan for that. A holiday was added to our food service contract, Juneteenth. Our grievance language changed, allowing a level 1 or level 2 grievance to have to be presented within 15 days instead of 20, which was in the prior contract. Also, the labor relations connection has been added as a possible arbiter for a level 4 grievance. The length of the contract is 3 years. The wages have increased. Year 1, it's a total of, 1.5%, year 2, 1.5%, and year 3, a 1.5%. In year 1, there are some other adjustments to the steps and percentages between steps. And then lastly, a joint labor management committee as part of the agreement will be established to look at the wages in year 2 and 3 to see if we can adjust or explore adjusting the wages to conform with state minimum wage law. The committee, I'll just point out that the committee will be meeting between February 2022 and April 2022.
Okay, any questions by anybody on the committee? Before we do that, do we have a motion?
We do. Move to approve the collective bargaining agreement with Reading Cafeteria employees, AFS-CME Council 93, Local 1703, effective July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2024.
Do we have a second? Second. Seconded by Carla. All right, any questions, conversation on this one? No? One quick point, I guess, as we think about budget. We have the joint labor management plan for February through March. Our budget for next year will be established by the end of January. So we need to think about that as we're planning appropriately, if, you know, to be consistent with our promise for that joint labor management conversation. Okay?
That's great, thank you.
All right, and we know they've already voted and approved this as it is right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any further questions, comments? All right, all in favor, hand raised?
We need a roll call for this one, for a contract. I don't remember.
Let's do it just in case.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do it just in case. Aaron?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
Tom? Aye. 5-0 by roll call vote. Thank you, Sean. Just in
Maybe for
case.
nothing, but yeah.
Better to be safe than sorry, right? That's the safest way to make sure it's done, so we'll go forward with that. All right, so that's approved. I have it here, I'll sign it, and we'll give it back to you at the end of the meeting, so thank you. All right, moving on to the FY21 end-of-year financial summary. And Susan, I assume this is you as well.
This is me as well. I'll start out by sharing with you that our FY21 appropriated budget totaled $48,332,663, and we have met all of our financial obligations within those funds appropriated. We ended the year with a total of $831,241. The town of Reading closed the fiscal year on September 16th, and as of that time, those funds were turned back to the town to be certified within their free cash and then ultimately redistributed during the next budget cycle. Within this brief memo that I've included in your packets this evening, I've outlined some of the areas of surplus, some of the areas of shortfall, and then some of the ways in which we've used the net surplus before turning over $800,000 to the town. So for example, within personnel, there were a number of accounts that saw balances, fund balances, and they were in the areas of classroom substitutes for both general ed and special ed, coaching stipends. Some of these surpluses were driven by unanticipated retirements, unfilled positions, a delay in hiring of staffing positions, as well as unpaid leaves of absence. Some savings in non-personnel were generated through renegotiated contracts with athletics, general ed, and special ed transportation companies. There was also a decrease in enrollment for out-of-district students, so that saved funds in terms of out-of-district tuition and transportation. There were some shortfalls in areas that were unexpected. Because of the situation of COVID, we weren't generating as much revenue or revenue at all in certain fee-based areas. And as a result, there were reduced offsets to our budget in the categories of full-day K, athletics, extracurricular activities, extended day, and use of school property. During the month of June, as funds were identified as remaining in certain accounts, there was some action taken. We purchased math and world language curriculum. We purchased technology and computer equipment and devices, art, custodial equipment, interactive whiteboards called smart boards, and athletic uniforms. We were also able to prepay special ed tuition for this year with some of the remaining funds. I've included an outline, a schedule of a summary of our cost centers for your review. I also wanted to share with you this evening that I will ask and recommend the school committee for a vote for a budget transfer between cost centers. And then lastly, I made note in my summary to you all that we're working on completing the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed's end-of-year report, which is a very extensive and complex financial statement, essentially, that every school district conducts and submits to DESE. And with that data, DESE uses it for analytical purposes. Every district uses that data for analytics. And our legislator also uses it for identifying and defining, calculating funding for school districts. So at our next meeting, I'll prepare for you a 3-year history of our Reading's end-of-year summary by certain category, revenue, expenditures, net school spending, so that you can all have some comparative information to show how our district is spending the revenue it's receiving over time.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
There are 2 motions for this that we'll have. Because there's 2, I'm going to pause the motions to see if there's any questions first, and then we'll take the motions after that. So are there any questions from the committee on any of this? Erin?
Not a question. How do we give back $800,000? I know, Susan, you had nothing to do with this. Tom, you had nothing to do with this. But I'm so furious about this, and I just don't understand how we get to the point where we can't come up with anything else to spend that money on. I can think of a million things. I sat here the other night and heard from at least 2 of my son's teachers that the textbooks are from the 1980s. Like, I just don't understand how we had that much left over and nothing to spend it on, and I just needed to say that out loud.
You want to say
I
something?
was just going to echo that. I think if you had asked any one of our classroom teachers and building administrators, anybody, the janitors, custodians, et cetera, everybody could have had a list that would have totaled more than $800,000. So I echo that extreme frustration.
Carla?
So, is there a way, I know this goes back to free cash, and I know we've already closed out the budget year, but can we petition the town to get, to, if we can come up with a list of stuff that we can spend it on, and petition the town to see if we can get that money back from free cash?
So, a couple things to address both, I think, and just to bring the history here, that I think many of us are aware of, but it's good to make sure everybody's on the same page. Some of this is because we had ESSER money last year that we were able to, we had to use by a certain point in time, and pushing a lot of spending into the ESSER money meant that money was not used in the operational budget. It had to be legal, it had to align everything, all that kind of fun stuff. So that was one thing, right? Second is, we already purchased a lot at the end of the year, some of which still hasn't shown up, from the supply and demand issues that Susan mentioned earlier. So that's there. Third is, there was a request, from my understanding, to each of the department heads if they needed or wanted additional materials. And in the world language case, we did. We bought a whole bunch of new materials in the world language case. We just bought a bunch of math materials as well the year before in alignment with the rollout of that stuff. There might have been other math materials we could have. There might have been other science materials we could have. But the request was there, and this is what we ended up getting in that time frame from a May, June perspective when Gail and John were working it through. The other way to look at this is we're really good stewards of our money. Right? This isn't a negative necessarily, or it could be, but it doesn't have to be. We're good stewards of the money too. We're doing things using the right funds from a grant perspective, from a ESSER fund perspective, et cetera, where we need to, while we can keep the other money local. Again, legally, in alignment with what those grants are for, and other things in this $800,000 that we might have otherwise spent if we didn't have that money. It's now available for Reading to spend for something else, whatever that something else is to be. And to your question, Carla, I think this does give us some, I would like to view this as this gives us some goodwill with the town, to say that if we don't have something superfluous to spend it on, we'll give it back. But if we feel like there's something we want to buy because we gave that back, can we get some credit for that and say, from a town meeting warrant perspective in April, if there's something that, through all the work that's going on with the team between now and then, if we want to petition for a warrant to be added in the February timeframe as we go through budget to allow us to purchase something, maybe this gives us some, for lack of a better way to say, street cred to use some of that if we wanted to. We also heard from the Finance Committee Chair last time, there are other ways we can look at some of the other information and use that money. So this is unfounded in my mind that there's $830,000. We've never done that, but we've also never had a COVID year. So we have to be realistic about the fact that we just had a COVID year as well. And in some ways, if we bought all this other stuff, there wouldn't have been capacity to absorb it as well, in terms of knowing how to use the new curriculum tools and whatnot. We've seen problems with that in the past, in terms of rolling out new curriculum tools and not having the supports necessary to do so. So I wish we didn't get back $800,000. But at the same time, I think there's also a lot of positive to look at it from the financial stewardship that's in place to do so. So I'll pause there and see if there's any other conversation.
I'll take maybe the Goldilocks position a little bit here. I agree, Tom, with you wholeheartedly. We've historically returned about 1% of the budget. I think that's a good financial practice. It suggests we're budgeting well, but it also suggests that we're not sort of profligate in our spending when we have, a few dollars left over. So I think that's a good practice. I also, as a former FinCom member, appreciate the value of free cash and us having regeneration every year and that sort of thing. So that's, that's where I start. I'll just say for my sake, and it sounds like we would echo this, if in, say, late June of 2022, we're looking at 800,000+, like, let's figure out how to shake the bushes and shoot more for that 1% range. Because I agree with what everyone said. This feels like a lot to return, even under what were unusual circumstances. It probably made it more challenging than typical to project. So,
Yeah, I think Susan, you and I were talking earlier, I think the forecast was like 400,000 we were going to return, and so when it came in at 800, it surprised
Yeah.
people a little bit as well. So it is what it is. We are where we are.
I'm just going to say one last thing, because I do agree that, yes, good financial practices, et cetera. As a community member who, the 12 people maybe watching this, hearing that we're giving back that much money, and we're in the fall where we're asking parents to give a lot of money out of their own pockets for school supplies and tissues for classroom teachers, et cetera, that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow as a parent who's shelling money out of their pockets to support the school system. That's all I'll say.
it would not be enough to pay for the Kleenex my daughter's class needs. Just throw that out there.
Potentially valid point.
Okay, with that said, Sean, I think we have two motions.
We
Let's start with
do.
the first one.
So a move to approve the following adjustments to our budget allocations. $1,200 from the administration cost center, $12,175 from the regular day cost center, and $2,700 from the special education cost center, totaling $16,075 moved to facilities.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Erin, not throwing her voice past Sarah. Okay, any further questions on that? We'll do a hand raise vote on this one as well. All in favor? All opposed? And that passes 5-0. And the second motion.
Move to approve the transfer of $43,800 from the special education cost center to the district-wide cost center.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Carla. And any further questions on that one? Okay. Hand raise vote, all in favor? All opposed? And that passes 5-0 as well. Okay. So we now move on to the next topic on the agenda, which is the potential establishment of the Reading and Writing Advisory Committee, with the packet having a memo from 4 of us, as we've been discussing it for quite some time. So I'll start, but Dr. Milczewski and Dr. Stice, if you want to add anything as we go through it, please do. I think first and foremost, for the committee to make sure they understand, is this establishment is in alignment with where the Cpac board voted a few weeks ago. At their meeting on the 14th, first of all, I guess everybody knows, there was a subcommittee in the Cpac focused on literacy and reading that did a lot of work last year, working with Dr. Stice, Allison Wright, Renee Lamaro, many others. I feel like I'm not giving them enough credit, but a lot of staff members worked through things last year as we were exploring the reading process. As we were exploring the reading process, more or less, it became obvious that this is not just a special education topic, but it's also a regular education topic, and sitting it with Cpac may not be the most effective means or effective place for it to be. So we had a few conversations along those lines. In particular, one member from that subcommittee resigned from the subcommittee because they don't have a student in the district anymore. Sarah and I were members of the subcommittee. We're here, obviously, and Alyssa Scaparrotti was the 4th member of the committee, and she is stepping down as a board member of Cpac, but still desires to be involved with this work. As we went through the year, the presentations that we had, I think many of the members of the committee attended those presentations with regards to the essential components of reading and Scarborough's reading rope, as well as the process of special education evaluations, all the different evaluations that are used, what they measure in there. And then we have a final presentation, well, final at the current time, planned for the end of November, that is focused on the different reading tools used in our special education programs. So that's what that committee did. But as a result of some of those challenges, and as a result of looking at this and saying, this is bigger than special education, the subcommittee voted to disband, the Cpac board voted to disband the subcommittee, provisional upon the school committee taking it up as an advisory committee. If the school committee does not take it up as an advisory committee, it goes back to the Cpac as a subcommittee, and it stays there. Okay? Moving on from this, I think, as Dr. Stice, Dr. Milczewski, Dr. Hardy, and I were talking about it, we wanted to make sure this was collectively very focused on all students, not some students, all students. And we felt like that's very important that we look at it from that lens. And it aligns with our understanding that we put in our equity statement with regards to identifying, analyzing, and confronting gaps and opportunities and outcomes for all students. This also aligns with some of the, conversations that we had over the summer and the trainings we took over the summer collectively, the podcasts we took over the summer with regards to what is possible and building that belief of what's possible. And then we want to think about it, how is it best structured? So there's a lot of conversations about how it's best structured. Some might say this could be an administrative committee. Some might say it should be an advisory committee. Some could say it's a subcommittee. We've made a very purposeful decision to say it's an advisory committee to the school committee for a couple of reasons. One was that we felt it was important that we allow staff official participation of the committee. As a subcommittee of the school committee, it could not be. Subcommittees of school committees, as you all know, are only members of the 6 of us, 2 or 3 of us. It cannot be anybody else. Official presentation. So by making an advisory committee, we can include committee members, but also other public body members, public members, whether that's, as the suggestion is on the paper, one of the Cpac members, other parents, but probably most importantly, the expertise of our existing staff, both from the town of Reading, as well as those that don't live here that have a really deep knowledge in this space. So we wanted to make sure that it was inclusive and we're all focused on moving in the same direction. We talked a lot about, the charge and put a lot in place from a foundational perspective to make sure that we were founded in the law, which is ECORI, Essential Components of Reading Instruction, and that we're achieving all of that, but also in the science, in particular Scarborough's reading rope, which, as mentioned, was part of the first training the group did. So we built out this kind of educational pull together of information, sharing of ideas, to eventually, think about things where they might go. And so I'll pause there and see Dr. Milczewski, Dr. Stice, if you have anything you want to add, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
So I think the part that I can say most excited about too was the idea of this work being done collaboratively. I hope that this sort of, all of our improvement work, and particularly work that we think is going to have such a, impact on our students and our families, should be done with multiple stakeholders across the table. So I, along with Dr. Stice and Dr. Hardy, are excited about, whatever this work looks like, to partner with families, hear families' voice, have them have a seat at the table, because they know their student needs the best as well, and to pair that with our teachers who are experts in this work and some of our, administrators who are experts in this work. I think that we feel the best improvement work that's done happens collaboratively. So I think that's the thing that excites me most about sort of this particular improvement initiative.
I agree. I think that was really the focus of our discussion, making sure that we had all the experts at the table, that our teachers had a voice in what was happening, and really allowing them to just help us gather data. What is out there? What makes sense? Are we focusing? And things that maybe we want to look at from their perspectives.
Okay, so with that said, any other committee members have questions, comments?
You want a motion first?
Sure, let's take a motion and we'll move forward with that. Thank you, Sean.
Move to create it's going to trip me up. Move to create the Reading in Reading Advisory Committee in compliance with School Committee Policy BDF and Section 4.14 of the Reading Home Rule Charter.
We have a second.
Second.
Seconded by Aaron. Okay, now any discussion? Sean?
Yeah. So I have a few things to say. I am frankly uncomfortable having this conversation in Chuck's absence for a couple of reasons. This feels to me like a really significant step towards creating advisory committees that are going to play a role in the setting of curriculum and instructional approaches, in the formation of curriculum and instructional approaches. That is squarely outside of the school committee purview. And when I think about the advisory committee, and I spent a lot of time over the last couple of days reading our policy and sort of thinking about how the policy would have come to be, and how, I believe it probably was intended, by the folks that created it. The advisory committee language in our policy seems to me to be focused on instances where the school committee has a decision that is within their purview, within their authority, for which they need to bring in outside expertise because their resident expertise on the committee isn't sufficient. That's not the problem that we're solving for here. What we're solving for here what we're doing here is we're creating an advisory committee where we are putting two school committee members in a position where they are influencing something that is outside the purview of the school committee. When this committee sat within the Cpac, I was frankly a little bit uncomfortable having school committee members as part of that subcommittee for the same reasons, but it was easier for me to get there because the Cpac has a statutory regulatory responsibility to advise the school district on sort of all programmatic matters with relation to special education. As we broaden this, as you've articulated, Tom, this is about all learners. It's not just about students with dyslexia or, other reading-related disabilities. As we broaden this, it becomes a school committee reflecting or advising or whatever on curriculum in a way that I don't believe is within our purview. I hear a lot of the justifications and the rationale, and I understand them, and I don't disagree with them. I should have prefaced all this by saying two things. One is, with regard to the specifics of the content we're talking about, of all the committee members, I'm probably at the 101 level. Some of you are 201, some of you are 301. So I'm not really weighing in on the specifics of the content necessarily. I would also preface it just by saying that I sort of appreciate and respect the goals as I read them, which are to sort of continue the great work that the Cpac committee did last year, particularly in that area of bringing some of this information to a broader section of the community. I attended one of those. I'm looking forward to watching the second one when it's posted. So, I'll throw that out there. That's one goal that I certainly wholeheartedly support. The second goal I wholeheartedly support is the notion that a broad group of stakeholders should be involved in these really important discussions that are already, going on within the administration and within our instructional teams. So I appreciate and support those goals. I think this is the wrong mechanism to do it. I think if the superintendent or the assistant superintendents need or would value input and advice, and it sounds like, they've just expressed that they would, I think a committee or an advisory committee to the administration is a more appropriate mechanism. From my perspective, it provides all the same benefits of the school committee school committee advisory committee. It also doesn't create that dichotomy of voting and non-voting members based on residency. There are benefits to that. I think that's a more appropriate model. I get really uncomfortable with us creating an advisory committee when I haven't seen articulated what are the decisions that I as a school committee member am going to be expected to make that will be directly informed by the work of this advisory committee. We're advising them, which is not our purview with respect to curriculum from my understanding. And I'm open to hearing other perspectives on that. I think that's a really problematic step. We could go down the slippery slope argument of, are we going to have a math advisory committee? Are we going to have a science advisory committee? At what level of curriculum involvement do we stop? We could go down that path. I also worry that, while the members of the administration who are here, seem broadly supportive of the idea of having a collaborative approach to this, I worry that this is a signal from the school committee that we think we have a place in substituting our expertise for the expertise of the educators that are empowered to figure out the how. We all have, objectives and priorities that we want to achieve while we're in the school committee. We need to focus on using goals, superintendent supervision, the budget, and policy to drive those things and not get involved in the how in the way that I worry that this advisory committee would. I think those are all the things I had to say, so I'll stop there. That was a lot, I know. But I feel strongly about this, and I'm uncomfortable having this vote without Chuck. One thing I'll just flag, our voting policy requires a majority of all members, not members present, so just let's keep that in mind as we figure out how to progress the conversation.
Okay. Anybody else have any further comments?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would, oh, sorry.
No,
Did you have
go
your
ahead.
hand raised too? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I would say in terms of, whether it's inside or outside of the school committee's purview, I would say there are many school committees across the state that do have a subcommittee focused on curriculum specifically. So this is not a new thing. It wouldn't be just us trying to wade into that territory. I think just a couple examples. Cambridge has one focused on curriculum and achievement. Brookline has one focused just on curriculum. Framingham has one on teaching and learning. Watertown has one on policy and curriculum. They were talking about math pathways last week. So this is something that other school committees do have as a dedicated subcommittee that is consistently, we're weighing in on these kinds of conversations throughout the year. I do think that by having it as part of a collaborative, we're all working on something together that we recognize as an area where we are falling short for all of our students. Literacy is something that we need to address. It is an urgent issue for all of our learners, whether they're struggling, whether they're excelling, need to be challenged. And I think that having it as part of the school committee shows that as a community, we are committed to the work, and it also brings along with it the transparency and accountability of being a public body, that having open meetings, having meeting minutes, et cetera. So I do think that's something worth considering as well.
Erin, did your hand up?
Yeah, I share Sean's sentiments here. So I first heard about this at the last Cpac committee meeting. But when I saw it laid out in the packet, it frankly raised a lot of red flags for me. I completely agree that we need to be looking at reading and literacy in the district for all learners. I love the idea of a collaborative committee where we are using, in addition to the expertise from our district leadership and the expertise on our staff, where we are also bringing parents to the table, because parents are experts on their children. And we have many parents who have done extensive research on this and I think really have something valuable to bring to the table. But I'm very uncomfortable with it being under the school committee and with school committee members on it, because it feels like the ultimate goal is curriculum, which is not our purview. So that's what I was grappling with. It doesn't feel like it needs to be an advisory committee to the school committee. It feels like it should be a committee under our assistant superintendents. I can't find it in here, so I don't know if it was a separate email that you sent us, Tom Wise. But the idea that certain staff couldn't be voting members on it because they don't live in Reading. I feel like the second it's an advisory committee to the school committee, we're putting certain hindrances on the ability and functions of the committee as well, versus if it's a committee under central office, it's my understanding you wouldn't have some of those same hindrances. So you could bring in any staff, regardless of what town they live in. I have to imagine we have some reading and literacy staff who don't live in Reading, who would be, wonderful members of this group. And yeah, I think those are my main points.
Okay, any other, Carla?
Chuck did give me something to read, so I don't know how this plays into our decision, but I will read it. He says, "Let me start by saying that I have the utmost respect for all of the previous and ongoing work on this topic carried out by the Cpac Reading Subcommittee. Further to that, I appreciate their thoughtful and collaborative dialogue. As we all know, reading is one of, if not the most core fundamental for success in life, and we should all strive to offer the best resources available to our students. Having said that, I believe this task falls on the shoulders of our staff first, with the support from the school committee, in making sure the necessary resources are available to achieve their goals for our students. I am very concerned that establishment of this advisory committee will undermine the staff's ability to research, create, and recommend what's best for our students. I also feel this will create an environment or precedent where advisory committees could be set up for math, science, et cetera. I understand there's nothing but good intentions for all students in bringing this forward, but I feel we need to let staff do what we have hired them to do. Thank you, and that's from Chuck. I will share my comments. Initially, I was hesitant. I think that you people have made a lot of really positive changes, helped to facilitate a lot of positive changes along with Jen, with reading in our district. I think we have a unique opportunity here because there is precedent set with other school committees for having these types of advisory boards. And I have struggled back and forth with what's in our purview and what's not. And I think part of it too is because we have this unique opportunity. I applaud the committee for taking this as a need in special ed and bringing it to the broader community of regular ed for all students. We know how important that is. I would like to see this committee, I'm willing to see how this committee operates for a year and see how it goes. And I think we have that unique opportunity to be able to do that. I too had concerns about the experts not being voting members. Because of our home rule charter, we can't have a committee under an elected board that has non-residents on it. So presumably some of our experts on this side of the table couldn't be on that board because they don't live in Reading. How I've kind of justified that in my mind is this committee is making a recommendation to staff. Staff doesn't have to take that recommendation. So I think I would be in favor of seeing how this plays out for the year, just to see how much momentum we've had going with reading in our district. I almost would like to see how it goes. Setting a time limit on it, right? Because these advisory committees have a time limit on it. That's my thought.
Okay, so all the feedback is good. I was frankly expecting it as well. I think that's why we spent a lot of time talking about it, to try and figure out if this was the right structure or not. The public nature of this is something I think is extremely valuable. Could we achieve the same thing with administrative subcommittee? Maybe. Probably with the commitment that Tom and Jen would make, we probably could. It wouldn't be the same type of it. It wouldn't have the same teeth from an open perspective. It wouldn't be something that we would, as school committee, from a purview perspective, Sean, to your point, budget is part of this. Budget comes into play. Goals are part of this. Goals come into play. Policy can be part of this. Policy comes into play. State law comes into the play as well. There's a lot of things that fit in here, but I think what's most important in all of that is the collaborative nature in which we've come about the solution. And the way in which we've talked about it and we've said, this is something we need for all our learners, not just our Cpac learners, and we need it for all of our Cpac learners too, not just the dyslexia ones, right? So what does it mean from a program perspective for REACH or SAIL or SOAR, not just LEAD? And I think we're united in that front. What this committee also does, it will have Reading residents from a staff perspective. We felt like that was very important. And it will have non-Reading residents as advisors that won't be ignored in any way, shape, or form. They're critical, whether that's Jen, whether that's, Allison, whether that's others, Tom, right? None of the three of them, Sarah doesn't live here either, so all four of them theoretically could be in that bucket. There could be many others in that bucket. But what it does also is it elevates the conversation from a staff perspective, just to have those conversations in a public way, and what can we do, what other information can we pull together, how can we learn collectively, how can we learn collaboratively, and then figure out what to do. What it's not doing, it's not looking at instruction, it's not its purview, that's what Sarah's going to be doing. It's not looking at the existing curriculum, that's not its purview, that's what Sarah's doing, right? It's looking at all of the other information out there that can inform an administrative pick of any sort of curriculum or instruction changes that are necessary. And that's the key thing here, is it's informational. It's informing. In no way, shape, or form is it also trying to undercut staff experience. We're girding it with 8 members of staff experience, right? That's huge, and that doesn't mean that nobody else can join, because it's a public meeting, so anybody can join, right? It just means that those are the members that would be there from an official perspective, from a quorum perspective. To Sarah's point, many other school committees have similar things. It's not unheard of. From a state law perspective, there's all sorts of other things in there too with regards to far-reaching decisions in this space. It's an old, outdated DESE website, but it does list it in terms of far-reaching decisions. It specifically says whole language or foreign language programs. It's not a far leap to say if the school committee has purview on whole language or foreign language programs, it should have some degree of purview on basic reading related stuff as well. That undercuts everything. As to the math and science related thing, that's possible. Who knows? I mean, we're looking at our MCAS scores, which we're going to go through in a couple weeks. It's possible, but it's not necessarily the urgent and immediate attempt right now, because I think, as we've been talking, if you can't read, you can't access math. If you can't read, you can't access science. If you can't read, you can't access social studies. And in fact, frankly, you're pulled out of those things, right? And we have many people that might have been, identified that really don't need to if we work through some of these things as well. And I think that ultimately leads to a budget-related question. It very much ties to the conversation we're going to have about full-day kindergarten. It very much does. We have to be able to afford it somehow. So how are we going to improve outcomes collectively? As a collective, this is not a Tom and Sarah thing. It is something we're both passionate about, right? But it's a collective, and this is aligned with the overall collaborative discussion process we've been having since this administration came as a team, right? Was how do we collaboratively and collectively move forward? How do we bring other people to the table that also build us up and make us even better? And that's what the focus here is. How do we make us even better? And help inform information so that the administration team can do, and the principals and the teachers can continue to grow that art and integrate, the proverbial sciences necessary to what they're trying to do. So I'll pause there. Erin?
You are stretching. You are stretching
No, I'm not.
majorly, yes. So I have not heard anyone argue that this is an important group that we should establish. I have not heard anyone argue with the goals of the group. I think they're spot on. My only concern is putting this under the purview of the school committee with 2 school committee members on it. That's the only issue I have with it. I do not think that school committee members should be part of the curriculum research, the curriculum advising that is part of this. Absolutely, curriculum is going to come out of this committee. And I don't think that falls under school committee. I think the meetings could probably be open if we requested it. I don't think they have to be closed meetings, correct me if I'm mistaken, just because it's not an advisory committee to the school committee. So I'm not saying that I think it has to happen behind closed doors. I absolutely think it needs to be collaborative. I agree with all the other people identified to be on it. I disagree with it falling under the school committee.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I just, I don't remember who made the comment, but there was a comment about, it makes recommendations, the staff doesn't have to take the recommendations. I don't think we should underestimate the impact that a school committee affiliated recommendation has relative to one that's from a stakeholder group that was assembled by the individual who's, individual or individuals who are looking for feedback. And, Sarah, you made the comment about other districts and their curriculum committees. I haven't looked at all the ones you mentioned. I looked at 3 or 4 of them today, and I looked at meeting minutes and agendas and all kinds of things. The sort of general theme that I found is that in those towns, they tended to have a lot of committees, and they were essentially policy committees with particular areas of focus in many cases, where the things that they were advising the committee on were explicit policy or budget or goal-setting questions that were related to curriculum or related to facilities or related to student safety or whatever other committees they may have. I'm not saying there aren't examples where there are school committees that are, sort of dipping their toes into what we're talking about here. I'm in the same place where I think all the goodness that comes out of the idea and all the positives around, doing it in an open, collaborative way can be achieved through an advisory committee that's formed by the administration, and that's my preferred model here. I can't get there. I think there's a big difference between sort of what the Cpac is empowered to, advise and make recommendations on with respect to special education and what we are empowered to advise and make recommendations on relative to the district as a whole. When the two of you were sitting on the Cpac advisory committee or subcommittee as school committee members, it was conceivable for me to sort of look at it and say, we have to recognize that all of us wear multiple hats, and you can serve in that role as parents. In this construct, you are explicitly serving in that role as school committee members, and that's just a very different orientation for me, and I can't get there. So.
Can you just clarify for
Yeah.
me? Because I look at this committee very similarly to the Cpac, and they are on the Cpac as school committee representatives.
We're on the Cpac as parents.
Only I'm there as the
Only Erin's
liaison.
there as a liaison.
And Erin's a
We're there
liaison,
as
she's not a
parents.
voting member of a significant subcommittee. They're on the subcommittee as parents.
And I think, I see what you're saying. I think, I'm going to leave it at that for the moment.
Okay.
Okay, so Sean, you started by saying you're uncomfortable having this as a vote without Chuck here. Chuck can't vote even though he wrote in. Do you,
Did I say that before or after Carla read his statement?
before?
Okay, well, so sounds like we know where Chuck stands, not having had the benefit of the conversation tonight. I am uncomfortable having the vote. I view this, I view the Cpac sort of expiration of their committee pending this decision as a little bit of, I don't really feel that creates a sense of urgency around doing this tonight. If you want to take the vote tonight, we can do it. I just, I will highlight that our voting method policy requires not just 3 of the 5 that are here, but a majority of the full committee. So I don't know that it changes things whether we vote tonight or at our next meeting or what have you, based on the discussion tonight, but I'll leave it up to somebody else if they want to make a motion to table instead of proceeding with the vote.
Tom and Sarah, excuse me, are you both on the reading advisory committee to Cpac?
Yes. We both are. The third remaining member is Alyssa Scaparati,
Right.
who's a current board member, but come October 12th will not be a board member of Cpac anymore.
Right.
So it's a bit of that's part of the challenge here is, yeah.
You, as we say, you wear those hats, right? You wear the hat as school committee member, parent, expert, right? There's a lot of different hats that volunteer that we wear.
So the policy you're reading there, Sean, says except on procedural matters, all votes of the school committee will be taken by call of the roll, and ayes and nays will be recorded in the minutes. If the vote,
So, yeah, so the relevant piece here, this is policy BEDF for
Yep.
those following along at home. The relevant piece here says, all actions will require a majority vote of all members, except as state law, Robert's Rules of Order, or policies of this committee require a larger majority. So, there are votes that require a
All
two-thirds
members.
majority, for instance, or.
it doesn't say
yeah.
members in attendance, so it
That's right.
requires all members.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess it's interesting to me that there's such vehement opposition to this, considering the work that's already happened, and considering the joint recommendation. Very interesting. So we're essentially, some of us are saying we don't agree with the recommendation from the Central Office Administration as well. Yes, I was part of that, and yes, I will say I'm fully part of that. But as the anchored section is very explicitly laid out as the four of us discussed it, as they, gave feedback on it and provided input and said, this is what we want to make sure it focuses on, that it's valuable to us as administration to have this sort of feedback. You're saying you're okay with it if it's an administration advisory committee, but not if it's a school committee advisory committee? That seems funny to me. Go ahead, Erin.
I just have a question.
Yep.
During these conversations, did you consider a subcommittee of the administration, or was it just, do we keep the Cpac subcommittee, or do we form an advisory committee to the school committee? Because I could certainly see why this was a preferable idea, because it involves staff, because we're bringing in our experts. It's not just a group of parents. So I'm just curious, did you consider this other option that we're talking about?
I will say when I initially started discussing the idea with Jen over the summer, it wasn't a conversation of whether this would be an advisory committee to the administration. That was never discussed. Because of the fact that it was already a public body as a subcommittee of Cpac, we thought a natural transition from one public body to another public body, or I did, and I think they agreed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jointly written this. That was kind of that was the natural transition. So to answer your question, do we think about it as an advisory to the administration? Taking away the public side of it? No, we did not. It wasn't part of the conversations.
Taking away the what side of it?
The public orientation of it.
Yeah, I think that's a false choice to take away the public orientation.
Yeah,
As
I
Aaron
don't-
said, I mean, we've got, we've only had two administrations in my time, but we've got the most collaborative administration that we've had in my time. I don't anticipate that there's going to be sort of a lack of outreach and engagement and all that, and opportunities for people to participate in formal roles and in informal roles and through surveys and through all those other things. And so I think that's a little bit of a false choice, positioning it as one's public and one's not. The other thing I'll say, Tom, you started to imply that, by maybe taking a no vote against this tonight, we were sort of disregarding the wishes of our staff members who were part of this discussion. With respect to them, the decision that you're asking us to make tonight about whether or not we as a school committee want to become one that involves ourselves in curriculum decisions and evaluation and assessment in this way, and some of those words are used in your charter here, is one that I don't think is theirs to make. I think it's their decision to make whether and how collaborative they want to be and in what fashion and which stakeholders to engage. I think that's their decision to make. Whether or not we as a school committee should create, something that we're not required to create and in my opinion not empowered to create is another question. So with respect to you all, I'm not disregarding your opinion that you're open to the feedback and the collaboration, but I just don't think this is the right way to do it. And I would be saying this regardless of the topic.
Go ahead.
I think that there is a natural progression from this initially stemming from Cpac, right? I think that part of it is it got legs this year, right? And there was a lot of progress made this year. And I think the progress was made because there was a collaboration. I would like to see that progress continue, especially with this topic. I may not have been this excited about it if it was another topic, but I would like to see that progression continue. I'm willing to say, hey, let's do this for a set amount of time. Let's do this for a year. Let's do it for a set amount of time, see how it goes, with the understanding that we are making recommendations to kind of build a bridge. It's ultimately their decision. No matter how you slice and dice it, they're going to be making the decision. I think the piece of it where, looking at best practices and gathering info from other districts, I think that is definitely one of the benefits I see of this committee being able to help with, in terms of that, that research piece of it.
So I guess as well, Carla, I think you're pausing, so.
Yep.
This isn't selecting curriculum. It was asked if we could look at other tools. If you want to take that part out, we can cross I out or F off if you want to, from a scope perspective. But there's a lot of other information gathering. There's only so much time in the day from an administration perspective that that this group can help with. If this group this committee will only get comfortable if it's the same group, but as an administrator instead of as an advisory subcommittee, I suppose that's fine. It just seems odd to me.
I'm not necessarily even saying it's the same group. The charge I'm comfortable with. If this is something that the administration is looking for support and extra arms and legs on, I can get comfortable with the charge. I don't have an opinion whether, I wouldn't necessarily have an opinion whether or not it's exactly the same group, exactly the same construct. My argument is that that's a decision that should be entrusted in them. This is a question of how we achieve goals and outcomes that we all want to achieve with regard to literacy, and right down to how you engage the community to get support, to bring in additional expertise, to bring in arms and legs, to help socialize your thinking. All of that is squarely in the how bucket that I think should be led from the administration. So I'm not challenging anything in the charter, or the charge that you have here as valuable things for community members to play a role in. I'm simply uncomfortable with this topic sitting inside of the school committee, and I just don't think it's. Carla, I disagree that, it's like any other committee that might make a recommendation. It is an advisory committee, which includes 2 school committee members, which is one issue, and it's an advisory committee to the school committee, which means that it, on some level, carries the weight of the school committee, because we've all endorsed its creation and its charter, right? If we do this, we've all, we may not have individually endorsed all of the decisions or recommendations, but we've endorsed its creation and its charter if we do this. That carries different weight to me when we decide whether or not his contract gets renewed than most other, models that you might pursue to create sort of the same collaboration. So that's where I'm at. We're kind of going in circles, but.
Tom, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I appreciate this conversation, and I think just in sort of where this work sits, I want to say a couple things just from hearing the conversation. I think first, I appreciate the clear intent of the committee at 10 o'clock, having a conversation. Is it almost 10 o'clock? It looks like a conversation about reading, because this topic really, really matters. And we have a lot of work to do in the community around this. And I know it deeply matters to every member of this committee. And quite frankly, I've heard from so many community members, this is an area we need some serious work, and I appreciate all of you advocating to do this work. So first, the intent of everyone, I think, is spot on. The second piece, the process, as you've all outlined, we want the extra arms and legs to help to move this work, and I also think to build and repair some of the relationships between administrative and families, that to get people behind any sort of things that we're going to do, we want sort of families at the table, and we know that that's really important. And then the last piece is I want to emphasize too, the charge and the goal was collaboratively developed, so I think we went through a couple iterations of feedback. Tom, Sarah, Jen, and I sat down and kind of tweaked some things, then went back and forth and thought, like, how do we make sure that this stuff would be sort of appropriate for the different stakeholders? How could we use the arms and legs? And I think that was a very healthy conversation. So I don't think I'm saying anything that anyone disagrees with here, that the intent is in the right place. We all agree with the process of having people around the table. We all agree having that what's outlined in the charge, I think we all feel really good about and feel like it was developed collaboratively. Where the committee decides ultimately sort of where this work sits, I mean, I think this is a healthy conversation. But I think it's work that we want to happen and we plan to move forward sort of regardless of sort of where it falls under sort of organizationally.
Okay, so given where we're at and given the time and given we have 3 other agenda items, I will entertain a motion to table since Chuck isn't here and Sean started that from a conversation perspective. And then we'll see, if we bring it back on the 14th or we have other conversations with the administration about it as well. It may be indefinitely tabled or it may be tabled to the 14th when Chuck can hopefully be here as well. Does anybody want to make that or do you want me to make it myself? I'll make it myself. I motion to table this motion until the 14th or until otherwise agreed with the administration to bring it back. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so the motion on the table is the tabling. If we table it, this is not voted on tonight, and we don't take the next related related conversation tonight. All in favor of tabling the discussion, say aye, or raise hands. Okay, all opposed to tabling? And it's tabled by a 4-1 vote. Okay, so moving us on to other topics. Back to the agenda items. All right, so we are now, assuming my computer restarts, going to move to policy JRA, the review and approval by the policy subcommittee. And before we take a report from the policy subcommittee, Sean, do you have a motion for us?
I do. Move to approve the amended policy JRA consistent with policy BGB, notice of such action having been given to the committee on September 3rd, 2021.
Do I have a second?
Second.
That's seconded by Aaron. Okay, so, Aaron, would you introduce this from the subcommittee, please?
Sure. So policy JRA, student records. It is one of 2 policies that we committed. Good night, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
That we committed to taking a look at as a committee. The process for the subcommittee was that we sought feedback from legal counsel. We also looked at the most current MASC, which is Mass Association of School Committees version of the policy. Largely, the edits that we propose came from council. We did a little bit of swapping out some words. Most notably, we changed, everywhere it said his and her, we changed to a more gender-neutral pronoun. We did have a question about the last sentence. So we came up with just putting in contact information, but there was sort of a question about how we wanted to word that and what was included. So we welcome the full committee's input on that.
Okay. And it was voted as is to move to those?
Yes, the one that you have labeled clean final version was voted 3-0 to move forward to the full school committee.
Okay, great, thank you. So, does anybody want us, is there any, comments, feedback, adjustments people would like to provide after having read it and seen the adjustments?
I have one more edit, I actually realized later.
Okay,
There are two, in the second paragraph, there are two places where it says parent,
yep,
and that should be parent/guardian.
okay.
So it's,
I see one in the, during the time a student is enrolled, toward the end of that sentence.
so there's written notice to the eligible student and their parent/guardian. And then there's the, during the time the student is enrolled, eligible student and their parent/guardian.
Okay,
I only found two, but maybe there's,
Is this the one you're talking about right here? The prior, parent are notified in writing?
those are the only, there's one more, students, parents, or legal guardian is covered in the first, it says students, parents, or legal guardian, so
yeah.
that's covered in the first paragraph. Those are the only three instances of parent, isn't it? Okay, so that's a motion, it's an amendment. I don't think anybody's going to object. Do we need to take a vote on that? I'm seeing no.
Nope.
I have one that Word is yelling at me about, and that is the comma after federal requirements, and shall obtain. Word is suggesting we remove the comma. And so it's just,
Sorry, what line are you
it's
on?
the
or-
first line of the second line of the second paragraph. It says, superintendent will provide for the proper administration of student records in keeping with state and federal requirements. And then there's a comma in there, and shall obtain a copy of the state student records regulations.
That's funny. That was in the original.
Yeah.
Is that because Word thinks it's a list, though?
No, it's actually removing it from a list because there's no comma before it. If I put it back, Control Z. It still yells at me. Doesn't think it's a list. In keeping with state and federal requirements, and shall obtain a copy of student records regulations. It's probably minor either way, but Word and its grammatical corrections.
It's
Any
fine.
objection?
No.
Nope.
Okay.
Trust the machine.
Trust the machine, yep. All right, so we've made those two amendments, so the motion on the table as amended. Any objection to the adjustment to it? No. All right, so let's vote on the motion as it is amended. Those in favor, raise your hands, please. And those opposed, and we have a 5-0 vote with the amended version, so great. Now we can move on to policy KDB in the agenda, and Aaron, let's start with a report there.
Do you want a motion?
Yes, let's start with it. Sean, thank you. Start with a motion.
Move to approve the amended policy KDB consistent with policy BGB, notice of such action having been given to the committee on September 23rd, 2021.
Okay. Aaron, a report from the subcommittee?
Yes, so similarly, this one was a closely tied to student records. So it's KDB, Public's Right to Know, is another policy that we committed to review. The policy subcommittee took feedback from legal counsel, compared it to the most recent mask policy, made few edits to this one, but we did add a website statement from mask, cleaned up a little bit of the language, but that was basically where it came from. And then the vote was 3-0 to move it forward to the full school committee.
Okay. So any topics, any discussions by anybody?
Just
Sean?
a grammatical thing.
Yep.
The EG in the third line,
Yep.
should that have a comma after
Yes,
it?
it should.
Okay.
You saw me looking.
Trust
at it.
me over the machine. All right, yeah.
The machine was saying it, so I was going to say that, so you and the machine are in line. I just had a question, Dr. Milczewski. The commonly available public record documents of the school district. How do you interpret that? Have you thought about how you interpret that?
Can you tell me where you're,
It's the first paragraph, first sentence of the third paragraph. All commonly available public record documents of the school district shall be posted on the district's website. So For example, I would think union contracts,
Yeah.
minutes, agendas, et cetera. The only problem I have with that is our union contracts are posted on the town of Reading's website, not ours. Maybe we can bring it back to ours as well. We don't post minutes to our website because it's centrally managed in the town archives as well. So maybe we need to think about, a small amendment, districts or town's website would be a minor adjustment to account for that. But I just wanted to get some feedback from that from an administrative perspective.
Yeah, I tend to, that's, my mind went to minutes, contracts, similar things. And if it's on the town website, I would be comfortable with that. We could also run it by, legal counsel if we have to too, but it seems to make sense to me and seems like a reasonable edit.
Yeah, that one came from Mask, so.
Yeah, Mass doesn't always have the same process from a town-by-town perspective, so is
Thank you.
everybody okay if I just add "or towns" to that sentence, district or towns website?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
It impacts the second sentence too, just the length of time such records shall remain posted on the district website.
I'll say district or town website. Thank you, Aaron. Excel is yelling at me. That is an ownership issue. It is district's ownership, not district plural. So it's good from that perspective. Okay, so there's two small additions: or towns to the first to the first sentence of the third paragraph, and or town to the second sentence of the third paragraph.
Sorry, first sentence of the third paragraph?
So, yep, right
Right
here, yep.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
it says district, so we just add or town right there.
Oh, sorry, okay, yeah,
Okay?
got it, yep.
Okay, so any further conversation?
Did we get a second?
Did we get a second? Good question.
I don't think we got a second.
Second by Carla.
So when Sam is watching this on video later, she,
Who seconded it?
Watch
Carla
live,
seconded it. Thank you. All right, any further conversation? Okay, seeing none, all in favor by hand raise, all opposed? And that passes 5-0 as well. Okay, so that concludes our meeting this evening. I just wanted to note a couple of other things real quick. In working with Dr. Milichewski and Sean, we've made some other minor adjustments to the calendar in terms of moving some things out to accommodate for the administration team. We had previously planned for the beginning of the school improvement plans to be discussed toward the end of October, early November. Because of the timing and things, we've moved that out to early December as it stands right now. And so that's the biggest adjustment so far. And then we still have placeholders in place for various different other policy updates that, depending upon how things work with the policy subcommittee, we might move those up or move those back, depending upon where things go in those places. But those are currently towards the end of October, early November. If we need to adjust, we will. And I'll make a commitment to the committee. We will not have a meeting for one policy update review. We can consolidate that where necessary as well if we need to, and give ourselves the appropriate time from a town meeting perspective and other things like that.
But you didn't change any meeting dates.
In this version, we have not changed any meeting dates. In the last version, we changed meeting dates.
Right,
In this version, we have not changed any meeting dates.
thank you.
Okay? Okay, so with that said, I'll take a motion to adjourn if anybody has one.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Carla, second by
Sean,
Sean.
second.
Sorry, this is the second for change.
Mix
Okay,
it up.
all in favor? Hand raised. All opposed? None. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Good night.